Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. True crime fanatics, this one will have you gripping the wheel a little tighter next time you're cruising America's highways. The I-70 killer, the phantom shooter who turned a 29-day rampage along Interstate 70 into one of the Midwest's most terrifying unsolved sprees. Picture this, spring 1992, the open road humming with truckers and travelers, small-town stores bustling with everyday folks. Then, in a lightning-fast blur, a calm, collected gunman walks in, executes store clerks with cold precision, and vanishes into the traffic like a ghost. 6 victims in 5 states? No, 6 victims across Indiana, Kansas, and Missouri, in under a month. All shot point-blank in the head, bodies left where they fell, cash registers sometimes untouched. Was this a spree killer chasing the thrill of the open interstate, a disgruntled everyman blending into truck stop crowds, or a highway phantom who knew exactly how to strike and disappear? Over 30 years later, with age-progressed sketches, fresh DNA pushes, and a best-selling book claiming the FBI has a hometown suspect, this case still screams for justice. Get ready for a white-knuckle ride through eyewitness terror, botched leads, and the lingering question, is the I-70 killer still out there sipping coffee at a rest stop somewhere? The nightmare ignited on April 8, 1992, in Indianapolis, Indiana. Robin Fuldauer, 26, a friendly Payless shoe source manager with a bright smile and a love for her job, was alone in the back room when a man walked in just before closing. He demanded money, then, bang, shot her execution style in the head. No struggle, no robbery frenzy. The killer was in and out in minutes, leaving Robin dead on the floor. Indianapolis police had no suspects, no fingerprints worth a damn. It felt like a random tragedy. Until 11 days later, April 19th. Wait, the dates tighten fast. On April 11th, the killer struck twice in Wichita, Kansas, hundreds of miles west along I-70. First, Patricia Trish Majors, 28, and her co-worker Patricia Smith, 31, were working a busy shift at a local shop when the same man entered. He shot both in the head with chilling efficiency, then slipped away. 2 women, same day, same highway corridor. Panic rippled through law enforcement. By April 27th, back in Terre Haute, Indiana, the killer hit again. Michael McMccown, a 40-year-old store clerk, was gunned down in his shop. Another headshot, another quick exit. The pattern was unmistakable. Small retail stores right off I-70 exits. Victims caught off guard. Killer gone before anyone could react. The spree accelerated. May 3rd in St. Charles, Missouri, Nancy Kitzmiller, 24, an employee at Boot Village, was shot dead in the back room. Then, the grand finale on May 7th in Raytown, Missouri. Sarah Blessing, 37, was murdered in her store, the killer's 6th confirmed victim in 29 days. Each scene was eerily similar. A white male, average build, sandy or reddish hair, lazy eyelids, high forehead, walking in like a customer, demanding nothing elaborate, shooting once or twice, and disappearing into the highway. Traffic. No sexual assault, minimal robbery, just cold, calculated executions. The I-70 killer had carved a bloody path from Indianapolis to Kansas City, striking 5 stores in 3 states and leaving families shattered. True crime sleuths, here's what made this monster so terrifying. He was organized, mobile, and invisible. He used the interstate like his personal hunting ground, blending into the thousands of drivers who passed daily. Eyewitnesses from surviving clerks described a polite, almost forgettable man in his 30s or 40s, 5'7" to 6 tall, reddish sandy hair, high forehead, droopy eyelids. Composite sketches flooded the news, but no solid hits. The FBI joined the task force, linking the crimes via ballistics and MO. But 1992, forensics. Limited DNA, no CCTV at most stores, and the killer left almost nothing behind. Tips poured in, truckers, drifters, even a few locals, but every lead fizzled. Theories exploded in true crime circles. Was he a long-haul trucker using I-70 as his route? A disgruntled ex-cop or military guy who knew how to execute quickly? Some pointed to possible links with later 1993 Texas murders along I-35, where similar store shootings occurred. Police are split, 50-50, on whether it's the same man. Others wondered if he was a local from Indianapolis, as a 2024 book claims the FBI privately believes. No confessions, no arrests. The case went cold, but never forgotten. Fast forward to the 2020s and the revival that has every cold case junkie buzzing. In 2021, a multi-agency task force, St. Charles, Raytown, Indianapolis, Terre Haute, Wichita, and FBI, reopened everything. Age-enhanced sketches were released, showing the suspect as an older man, with graying hair and deeper lines. Still that distinctive, lazy-eyed stare. DNA from multiple scenes was resubmitted for advanced testing, including genetic genealogy. By 2022, detectives said they had new evidence and weren't calling it cold anymore. A 2024 book by journalist Bob Cyphers dropped a bombshell. The FBI reportedly believes the killer is from the Indianapolis area and may still be alive. Tips keep coming. Truckers with alibis, family members eyeing relatives, even 2025 reports of possible new Texas links. As of March 2026, the I-70 killer remains unidentified and at large. The task force is still active. DNA results are being compared against databases, and the Highway Serial Killings Initiative keeps the file open. Sarah Blessing's bakery-owning neighbor in Raytown still leaves flowers at the old plaza. Families of Robin, the two Patricias, Mick, Nancy, and Sarah hold vigils and push for answers. One detective put it perfectly. He walked in, shot, and vanished, but highways have long memories. This spree is pure true crime adrenaline. A killer who weaponized America's love of the open road, striking fast and fading into the rearview mirror. 6 ordinary people, store clerks just doing their jobs, snuffed out in seconds. Their deaths a stark reminder that evil doesn't need a mask when the highway provides cover. The I-70 killer might be dead, dying, or sipping coffee at a rest stop right now. The question lingers. Will DNA or a lucky tip finally unmask him? If you have any thoughts or leads, drop them in the comments. And if this chilled you to the bone, hit that like button, subscribe for more mysteries, and comment below. Until next time, stay vigilant in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. True crime fanatics, this one will make you lock your doors and question every shadow in an alley. The Frankfurt Slasher, Philadelphia's 1980s nightmare that turned the gritty streets of Frankfurt into a slaughterhouse of slashed throats and silent screams. Imagine this. A working-class neighborhood of row homes, factories, and corner bars where ordinary women walked home after night shifts only to vanish into the darkness and reappear days later, throats carved open, bodies dumped in alleys or abandoned lots like discarded rags. 9 victims, mostly vulnerable black women, brutally stabbed and slashed between 1985 and 1990. A prime suspect convicted of just one murder, dying in prison while families screamed he was only the tip of the iceberg. Was the slasher a local monster who knew every backstreet? A copycat hiding behind one man's conviction? Or a phantom who slipped away into Philly's underbelly? Over 35 years later, with fresh DNA pushes and eyewitnesses still haunted, this case drips with unanswered blood. Get ready for a razor-sharp ride through terror, botched policing, and the lingering question: did the Frankfurt Slasher really die behind bars? Or is his blade still waiting in the city of brotherly love? Frankfurt in the mid-1980s was pure Philadelphia grit. Blue-collar row houses packed along the elevated train line, factories churning out jobs by day and shadows by night. Drugs were creeping in, prostitution lingered near the L tracks, and women walked home alone after late shifts at bars or factories. The killings began quietly, almost unnoticed at first. On August 19, 1985, 35-year-old Evelyn Evie Smith, a mother of 2 who worked odd jobs, was found in an alley off Frankfurt Avenue, throat slashed so deeply her head was nearly severed, body stabbed over a dozen times. Police wrote it off as a drug deal gone bad. Just weeks later, another woman turned up in a similar alley, same savage slashing pattern. True crime junkies, feel that chill? The pattern was already forming, but the city was too busy to connect the dots. The terror escalated fast. In 1986 and 1987, 4 more women, Mary Mickey McGuire, 39, Teresa Terry Johnson, 34, and 2 others whose names were lost to street life, were discovered in Frankfurt alleys and vacant lots, throats cut ear to ear, bodies mutilated with a sharp blade. Each victim was partially clothed or nude, dragged a short distance and left where rats and weather would do the rest. No robbery, no sexual assault in most cases, just pure ritualistic slashing. By 1988, the body count hit 6, and the press finally gave the killer a name, the Frankfurt Slasher. Panic gripped the neighborhood, women carried knives, neighbors formed night watches, and the elevated train became a rolling rumor mill. Yet, the police response? Sloppy at best. Evidence was lost, witnesses ignored, and the victims, many poor, many black, many with troubled pasts, were dismissed as street women whose deaths didn't deserve full resources. Then came the breakthrough, or so it seemed. On October 10, 1989, 28-year-old Catherine "Cat" McDonald, a mother and occasional sex worker, was found in a Frankfurt alley with her throat slashed and body stabbed 20-plus times. This time, a suspect emerged quickly. Leonard Christopher, a 40-year-old drifter and handyman known locally as Mad Dog. Christopher lived in the area, had a violent temper, and was seen arguing with Cat days earlier. He was arrested, and in 1990 a jury convicted him of her murder after a dramatic trial where he screamed his innocence from the stand. Sentenced to life, Christopher became the face of the slasher. But here's the twist that keeps every true crime obsessive awake. He was only ever charged with one killing. The other 8? Officially unsolved. Christopher always claimed he was framed, saying the real slasher was still out there laughing. The case didn't end with the conviction. In 1990 and early 1991, 2 more women were found slashed in the exact same Frankfurt alleys. Same blade style, same dumping spots. Christopher was already locked up. Families of the earlier victims protested loudly. "One man can't be in 2 places at once!" Detectives quietly admitted the pattern matched perfectly, yet the official line stayed, "Christopher did the rest." True crime sleuths, imagine the outrage. 9 mothers, sisters, and daughters reduced to 1 conviction while the blade kept swinging. Christopher died in prison in 2012 at age 62 from natural causes, taking any secrets to the grave. But the Frankfurt slasher legend never died. In 2018, a cold case review by the Philadelphia Police Department quietly re-examined all 9 files using modern DNA technology. Partial profiles from 2 victims were developed, but no matches surfaced. By 2023, genetic genealogy was applied to preserved evidence from the 1989 Cat McDonald scene, still pointing only to Christopher for that one murder. The other 8 remain open. A 2025 Philadelphia Inquirer investigation revealed that several witnesses from the 1980s had recanted or claimed police pressure to finger Christopher. Some local old-timers still swear the real slasher was a white van driver who disappeared after 1990. Others whisper about a copycat who used the slasher's signature to settle scores. The victims deserve to be remembered far beyond headlines. Evelyn Smith, Mickey McGuire, Terry Johnson, Cat McDonald, and the unnamed others were daughters, mothers, and survivors scraping by in a city that failed them. Their families formed support groups that still meet in Frankfurt row homes, lighting candles every August. The alleys where bodies were found are now memorial sites, small crosses and faded flowers that locals refuse to let city crews remove. As of 2026, the Frankfurt slasher case is technically closed for Leonard Christopher's single conviction, but wide open for the rest. The Philadelphia Police Cold Case Unit still accepts tips, and a new task force quietly compares DNA from the scenes against national databases. No breakthroughs yet, but every true crime junkie knows the truth. One man was convicted, but the blade that carved through Frankfurt may have belonged to someone who walked free. This is the kind of case that sticks with you. The kind where the monster might have worn a familiar face, or maybe 2. The Frankfurt slasher turned a proud Philadelphia neighborhood into a graveyard of slashed throats and unanswered prayers. The question still cuts deep. Did Leonard Christopher act alone, or did the real slasher simply hand off his knife and vanish into the city of brotherly love? If you have any thoughts or leads, drop them in the comments, and if this chilled you to the bone, hit that like button, subscribe for more mysteries, and comment below. Until next time, stay vigilant in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. True crime lovers, this is not the story of one killer in one town. This is the story of a 724-kilometer stretch of highway in northern British Columbia that has become a symbol of systemic failure, generational trauma, and a national crisis that Canada still grapples with, the Highway of Tears. Imagine a remote, breathtakingly beautiful highway cutting through dense forests, mountains, and First Nations territories. For decades, Indigenous women and girls have vanished or been found murdered along this isolated corridor of Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert. Hitchhiking was often the only way to get to medical appointments, visit family, or reach jobs in a region with limited public transit and crushing poverty. Many never made it home. Their families still wait for answers, justice, and acknowledgement that their loved ones mattered. The Highway of Tears is not just a road, it is a scar on Canada's soul, a place where the disproportionate violence against Indigenous women and girls has been laid bare for the world to see. Official counts vary wildly. The RCMP's Project Ipana, launched in 2005, officially investigated 18 murders and disappearances along Highway 16 and parts of Highways 97 and 5 from 1969 to 2006. Indigenous organizations and families insist the true number is far higher. Estimates range from 30 to over 50 along the specific corridor, and thousands more across Canada as part of the broader Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls (MMIWG) crisis. The victims were daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends. Many were young, teenagers full of dreams, others were women simply trying to survive. Most were Indigenous. Many were last seen hitchhiking, a dangerous necessity in an area where buses were scarce and taxis unaffordable. Their bodies were often found in remote ditches, forests, or rivers, sometimes weeks or months later. Some cases remain missing persons with no body ever recovered. Here are just a few of the known names that families refuse to let fade. Gloria Moody, 1969, 27 years old, found murdered in Williams Lake. Micheline Perret, 1970, 18, vanished near Prince George. Gail Ways and Pamela Darlington, 1973, both 19, found murdered near Clearwater. Monica Ignace, 1974, 15, last seen hitchhiking. Colleen McMillan, 1974, 16, DNA later linked to American serial killer Bobby Jack Fowler. Monica Jack, 1978, 12 years old, her bicycle found near the highway. Ramona Wilson, 1994, 16, found murdered. Roxanne Thiara and Alicia Germain, 1994, both 15 and 15. Ayala Sarek Auger, 2006, 14, one of the cases that helped spark renewed attention. And the list continues into the 2000s and beyond. Families tell stories of daughters who simply stepped out for a ride and were never seen again. The pain is compounded by the knowledge that many cases were initially dismissed or poorly investigated because the victims were Indigenous, poor, or involved in high-risk lifestyles. The RCMP launched Project Ipana in 2005 after 3 teenage girls, Ramona Wilson, Roxanne Thiara, and Alicia Germain, were murdered in 1994. The task force eventually reviewed dozens of cases. DNA breakthroughs have solved a few. Bobby Jack Fowler, a U.S. criminal with a long record, was linked via DNA to Colleen McMillan in 2012. He died in prison in 2006. Cody Legabakoff, a young local man, was convicted of 4 murders, including 15-year-old Lauren Dawn Leslie, whose body was found near the highway in 2010. But the vast majority remain unsolved. What makes the Highway of Tears so devastating is not only the number of victims but the systemic issues that allowed the violence to continue. Remote communities with limited transportation options forced women to hitchhike. Months inside, poverty, addiction, and the lasting impacts of residential schools and colonialism created vulnerability. Police response was often slow or dismissive. Families spoke of officers assuming their daughters had simply run off or were involved in drugs or sex work, rather than treating them as high-risk missing persons from the start. In 2013, a Highway of Tears symposium produced 33 recommendations, including better transit, more cell service, education, and support services. A subsidized bus service eventually began operating on parts of the highway. In recent years, new billboards honoring the missing and warning against hitchhiking have gone up. In late 2024 and 2025, new 5G cell towers were installed to close dangerous coverage gaps. A 20th anniversary symposium is planned for April 2026, complete with an awareness walk and pillar unveiling to honor the lost. Yet families and advocates say meaningful change is still too slow. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, 2019, issued 231 calls for justice, many directly relevant to the Highway of Tears. Carrier Sakani Family Services and other Indigenous-led organizations continue pushing for implementation, including better transportation, culturally safe services, and genuine accountability from police and governments. Some cases have seen movement. DNA and genetic genealogy are being applied where evidence survives. Community-led initiatives and increased media attention have kept pressure on authorities, but as of 2026, most Highway of Tears cases remain unsolved. New billboards and improved cell service are positive steps, but they cannot bring back the daughters who never came home. This is bigger than one highway. The Highway of Tears has become a powerful symbol of the broader MMIWG crisis affecting Indigenous communities across Canada. It forces uncomfortable conversations about racism, colonialism, poverty, and the devaluing of Indigenous lives. Families continue to march, hold vigils, and demand that their loved ones' names are spoken and their stories remembered. The road is still long. New cell towers help, but they don't erase decades of mistrust. Bus services exist on parts of the route, but gaps remain. Most importantly, the women and girls who vanished along this stretch deserve justice, not just memorials. The Highway of Tears is a place of unimaginable loss, but also of incredible resilience. The families who refuse to stay silent, the communities that support one another, and the advocates who keep pushing for systemic change show the strength that has always existed in these nations. Their daughters' names deserve to be remembered: Gloria, Micheline, Gail, Pamela, Monica, Colleen, Ramona, Roxanne, Alicia, Ayala, and so many more whose stories we may never fully know. If you have any thoughts, information, or simply want to honor the victims, drop them in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into real mysteries, and comment below with the name of a missing or murdered loved one you want remembered. Until next time, stay vigilant in the shadows, and remember that silence has never protected the vulnerable. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. True crime lovers, this case is a masterclass in how a seemingly idyllic beach town can hide pure evil in plain sight. We're heading to the sun-soaked shores and neon-lit streets of Daytona Beach, Florida, in the mid-2000s for the chilling story of the Daytona Beach Killer, a predator who turned the city's party atmosphere and vulnerable underbelly into his personal hunting ground. Between late 2005 and early 2008, at least 4 women were executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head, their naked bodies dumped in alleys, dirt roads, and abandoned lots. The killing sent shockwaves through the community, especially among sex workers who realized a monster was stalking them while the rest of the city partied on. For over a decade, the case went cold, with whispers of a serial killer roaming the streets. Then DNA from a later murder cracked it open, leading to the arrest of a seemingly ordinary college student. But even with a conviction for 3 murders, questions linger about a possible 4th victim and whether the full truth has ever been told. This is the haunting tale of how Daytona Beach's bright lights cast long, deadly shadows. Daytona Beach has always had 2 faces. By day, it's the legendary speedway, spring break destination, and family vacation spot with its wide, hard-packed beaches perfect for driving cars right up to the surf. By night, especially in the 2000s, certain neighborhoods transformed into something darker, areas where survival sex work thrived amid poverty, addiction, and the constant flow of transients drawn to the tourist economy. The killer exploited this divide perfectly, targeting women who were often overlooked by society, black women working as prostitutes or struggling with substance issues. He didn't torture them for hours or leave elaborate signatures. Instead, he struck with cold efficiency, shooting each victim once in the back of the head execution style, stripping their clothes, and dumping the bodies in isolated spots where discovery might take hours or days. The lack of struggle in many cases suggested the women may have known or trusted their killer, or were caught completely off guard. The first known victim was Laketta Mae Gunther, a 45-year-old Daytona Beach resident described by family as smart, outgoing, and full of life. Around Christmas 2005, she was supposed to help prepare dinner with friends but never showed. On December 26th, her naked body was discovered wedged in a narrow alley off Ridgewood Avenue. She had been shot once in the back of the head. No clothes, no immediate robbery signs, just a single devastating wound. Police initially treated it as an isolated homicide, but the community felt the first ripple of unease. Less than a month later, the pattern emerged with terrifying clarity. On January 13, 2006, Julie Green, 34, told her boyfriend she was stepping out to use a payphone to call her dad. She never returned. Her body was found the next day, January 14th, also naked and shot execution-style in the head. Crucially, ballistic evidence from the bullet matched the gun used on Laketta Gunther. Investigators now had a linked double homicide. Both women were known to engage in survival sex work, and both bodies were left in or near alleys in the same general area. The killer was methodical, efficient, and seemingly unafraid of being caught in a busy tourist city. The third strike came just over a month later. On February 24, 2006, an anonymous caller reported finding a body while out walking. Iwana Patton, 35, was discovered on a dirt road, once again naked and shot in the head. The same .40 caliber handgun was linked through forensics. 3 women in less than 2 months, all killed the same way, all dumped with their clothes removed. Panic began to spread among Daytona's street community. Women started working in pairs or refusing clients after dark. Local media cautiously reported the connections, but many residents still viewed the deaths as those kinds of crimes that happened to those kinds of women. After Iwana Patton, the killings appeared to stop. For nearly 2 years, the streets breathed a tentative sigh of relief. Then, on January 2, 2008, the body of Stacy Charlene Gage, 30, was found at an abandoned church. She had been missing since early December 2007 and was also shot in the head. While the method was identical, no ballistic match could definitively tie her to the earlier 3 murders at the time. Investigators suspected a connection but lacked hard proof. The case once again went quiet, leaving 4 families devastated and a city wondering if the nightmare was truly over. For over a decade, the Daytona Beach killer remained unidentified. The investigation faced classic challenges of the era: limited surveillance, degraded evidence on bodies exposed to the elements, and the transient nature of the victims' lives, which made witness statements harder to corroborate. Daytona Beach police worked with other agencies, but without a strong suspect pool or usable DNA from the early scenes, progress stalled. Some wondered if the killer had moved on, died, or been imprisoned for an unrelated crime. The breakthrough finally came from an unexpected direction. In 2016 in Palm Beach County, Florida, 32-year-old Rachel Bay was found murdered in a similar fashion, shot in the head. Investigators collected DNA from the scene. When they ran it through databases, it matched DNA evidence recovered from 2 of the Daytona Beach victims, Laketta Gunther and Julie Green. Forensic links also tied the suspect to Iwana Patton's murder. The net was closing. Using genetic genealogy, authorities traced the DNA to a family member and eventually identified Robert Tyrone Hayes, born March 12, 1982. At the time of the Daytona murders, Hayes was a student at Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, studying criminal justice of all things. He had even been interviewed by police in 2006 after purchasing a .40 caliber handgun similar to the murder weapon. He denied involvement and was released. Years later, when detectives needed a fresh DNA sample, they surveilled him in Palm Beach County. Hayes casually discarded a cigarette butt and a Steel Reserve beer can. The DNA on those items matched the crime scene evidence. Hayes was arrested in September 2019 by the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office for Rachel Bay's murder. He was subsequently charged in the Daytona cases. The trial process was long and heavily covered. In 2022, after a lengthy legal battle, Robert Hayes was convicted of the first-degree murders of Laketta Gunther, Julie Green, and Iwana Patton. He received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors had sought the death penalty, but the jury's decision spared him execution. Stacy Gage's murder remains officially unlinked to Hayes by physical evidence, though many investigators and victim advocates believe he was responsible. As of 2026, no charges have been filed in her case, leaving her family without full closure. Hayes has not confessed to additional killings, and while some speculate he may have more victims, no definitive links have been proven. The Daytona Beach killer case stands as a textbook example of how DNA and genetic genealogy can solve decades-old crimes, but also how systemic biases can delay justice for marginalized victims. The 4 known victims, Laketta, Julie, Iwana, and possibly Stacy, were mothers, daughters, and friends whose lives were reduced by some to their struggles with addiction or sex work. Their families fought tirelessly to keep the cases alive, refusing to let them be forgotten as just another prostitute murder. Today, the alleys and dirt roads where the bodies were found are quieter, but the scars remain. Daytona Beach continues to attract millions of visitors every year for Bike Week, NASCAR, and beach vacations, yet locals in certain neighborhoods still carry the memory of those dark years, when a killer walked among them, gun in hand, choosing victims who society too often ignored. This case reminds every true crime enthusiast of a harsh truth: monsters don't always look like monsters. Robert Hayes was a college student, seemingly ordinary, studying the very system meant to catch people like him. He blended in, exploited vulnerability, and nearly got away with it forever. Thanks to persistent detective work and advances in forensic science, 3 families received a measure of justice. But the shadow of the 4th victim, and the possibility of others, still lingers along Daytona's sunlit streets. The Daytona beach killer may be behind bars, but the questions he left behind continue to echo. How many more women might he have claimed, and how many similar predators are still out there, cruising the highways and back alleys of America's vacation towns? If you have any thoughts or leads, drop them in the comments. And if this chilled you to the bone, hit that like button, subscribe for more mysteries, and comment below. Until next time, stay vigilant in the shadows. But even with a conviction for 3 murders, questions linger about a possible 4th victim and whether the full truth has ever been told. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. True crime enthusiasts, this one cuts especially deep. A heartbreaking tale of vulnerability, systemic neglect, and a predator who hunted in plain sight along the back roads of rural North Carolina. We're talking about the Edgecombe County serial killer, also known as the 7 Bridges Killer, a monster who terrorized the Rocky Mount area from roughly 2005 to 2009. At least 10 black women, many struggling with addiction, poverty, or survival sex work, vanished from the streets, only to be found stabbed, beaten, or left to decompose in remote wooded areas and ditches near 7 Bridges Road. Bodies scattered like forgotten secrets in the pine forests. While families begged for answers and authorities moved slowly, one man was eventually charged with a single murder and locked away for life, but many believe the full truth died with the unsolved cases. Was he the only killer, or did a second predator exploit the chaos? Over 15 years later, the case remains a painful scar on Edgecombe and Halifax counties, a stark reminder of how society too often overlooks the most marginalized victims. Join me as we walk the lonely roads where these women disappeared and search for the truth that still evades justice. The nightmare unfolded in the mid-2000s in and around Rocky Mount, a modest city straddling Edgecombe and Nash counties. The area was known for its tobacco history, manufacturing jobs, and tight-knit communities, but also for pockets of deep poverty and the drug trade that preyed on the vulnerable. Many of the victims were black women living on the edges of society, some working as prostitutes in what locals called the neighborhood, others just trying to survive day to day. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends whose disappearances were sometimes dismissed as runaways or lifestyle choices, until their bodies started turning up in the woods. The first confirmed victim was 29-year-old Melody Lachey Wiggins, a mother from Rocky Mount. She was reported missing on May 30, 2005. Just days later, on June 2nd, her partially stripped and brutally beaten body was discovered in a rural area of Edgecombe County. She had been stabbed and assaulted. The discovery sent shockwaves, but it was only the beginning. More women vanished in the following years. In January 2007, 43-year-old Christine Mary Boone went missing. Her skeletonized remains were found in March 2010 in Halifax County. On May 8, 2007, 35-year-old Jackie Nikelia Thorpe disappeared, her decomposed body discovered months later near 7 Bridges Road. Then came 46-year-old Joyce Renee Durham, last seen on June 17, 2007. She remains missing to this day. In February 2008, 50-year-old Ernestine Battle vanished. Her remains were found in March 2008 near 7 Bridges Road. The list grew even more tragic. Taraha Shanice Nicholson, a young mother, was murdered, and her case would later become the only one to result in a conviction. Other victims included Jarnice Latanya Hargrove, 31. Elizabeth Jane Smallwood, Roberta Williams, 40, remains found in 2010, Nikki Thorpe, and Yolanda Lancaster. In total, authorities linked 10 suspected victims, all African-American women, with 8 bodies recovered. Most showed signs of stabbing, beating, or blunt force trauma. Many were found in the same general area along or near Seven Bridges Road, a rural stretch that became synonymous with horror. The community was devastated, but frustration mounted as investigations dragged. Families accused law enforcement of dragging their feet because the victims were poor black women with complicated lives. Billboards with the women's faces eventually went up, pleading for information, but early tips were slow to produce results. The killer, or killers, seemed to know the back roads intimately, dumping bodies in places where discovery could take weeks or months. In 2009, a suspect finally emerged, Antoine Maurice Lindell Pittman, a local man with a criminal history. He was charged with the murder of Taraha Shanice Nicholson. Pittman was convicted in 2011 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. While some hailed the conviction as justice, many families and observers believed he was responsible for only one, or perhaps a few, of the deaths. The other cases were never officially linked to him with enough evidence for charges. Pittman has maintained his innocence in the broader spree, and as of 2026 he remains behind bars serving that life sentence. The Edgecombe County Sheriff's Office and other agencies have long maintained that while multiple deaths occurred in the same area, not all may be connected to a single serial killer. However, the geographic clustering, similar victim profiles, and timing have convinced many, including victim advocates and true crime researchers, that a serial predator, or possibly two, was active in the region. Some bodies showed signs of sexual assault, others did not. The remote dumping sites suggest someone familiar with the rural landscape. As of 2026, the Edgecombe County serial killer, or Seven Bridges killer case remains partially unsolved. While Pittman was convicted for Taraha Nicholson's murder, the majority of the linked deaths are still considered open or unresolved by many in the community. Cold case units continue to review evidence using modern DNA techniques and genetic genealogy, but challenges remain due to the age and condition of the remains. No new arrests have been made, and one victim, Joyce Renee Durham, has never been found. This case is a painful example of how marginalized lives can be devalued, allowing a killer to operate with less scrutiny. The women of Rocky Mount and Edgecombe County deserved better protection, better investigations, and better remembrance. Their stories are finally receiving more attention through documentaries, podcasts, and community memorials, but true closure remains elusive. The pine woods and back roads near Seven Bridges Road still hold their secrets. Families continue to seek answers, lighting candles and sharing memories of the daughters, mothers, and sisters who were taken too soon. If you have any thoughts or leads, drop them in the comments, and if this chilled you to the bone, hit that like button, subscribe for more mysteries, and comment below. Until next time, stay vigilant in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. Tonight's case is unlike anything we've covered so far, because it's not just a murder story, it's a story about identity, about a man who spent his life becoming no one, so that no one could ever pin anything on him, and about 4 victims who spent decades without names, without voices, without anyone who even knew to mourn them. It starts with a barrel in the woods of New Hampshire. And it doesn't end, not really, until 2025, 40 years later, when the last of 4 murdered souls was finally given back her name. This is the story of the Bear Brook murders. On November 10, 1985, 2 brothers were hunting in Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire, a quiet stretch of forested land about 15 miles south of the state capital. One of them noticed something near a trail, close to the ruins of a burned-down building. A large industrial 55-gallon steel drum tipped on its side. As he moved closer, something caught his eye. A foot, protruding from the barrel. Inside, wrapped in plastic bags, were 2 bodies. Both had been skeletonized, reduced almost entirely to bone. An adult woman, estimated to be between 23 and 33 years old, and a young girl, estimated to be between 8 and 10 years old. Autopsies determined both had died from blunt force trauma to the head. They had been in that barrel, authorities estimated, for up to 5 years, meaning they may have been murdered as far back as 1980. No identification, no missing persons match, no leads. The two victims were buried in a nearby Allenstown cemetery. The tombstone read, "Here lies the mortal remains known only to God of a woman aged 23-33 and a girl child aged 8-10. Their slain bodies were found on November 10, 1985, in Bear Brook State Park. May their souls find peace in God's loving care." It was a dignified farewell to people whose names nobody knew, and for 15 years, that was where the case stayed. Frozen, unsolved, heartbreaking. Then, in May 2000, a New Hampshire state trooper named John Cody revisited the site. He had been handed the cold case file and decided to go back to the park himself, to walk the ground, to see if 15 years of eyes had missed something. It was a long shot, but sometimes, long shots pay off. What he found wasn't a clue. It was another barrel. About 100 yards from the original discovery site, a second 55-gallon steel drum lay hidden in the underbrush. Inside were two more children. Young girls, their bodies in the same condition as the first two, wrapped in plastic, skeletonized, killed by blunt force trauma. Investigators concluded the drum had likely been there the entire time, pushed around, perhaps by kids playing in the area, or simply overlooked in the dense undergrowth. 4 victims, 1 woman and 3 children, all killed, investigators now believed, by the same hand. All dumped in the same remote corner of the same state park. All left to disappear from the world without a trace. The case should have been impossible. It was about to get stranger. DNA testing in 2014 revealed that the woman and 2 of the girls shared mitochondrial DNA, meaning they were maternally related, a mother and her daughters. The 4th victim, one of the girls found in the second barrel, was unrelated to the others. She had come from somewhere else entirely. Isotope analysis suggested she had likely spent her early childhood in the Southwest, possibly Arizona, Texas, California, or Oregon. Hundreds of leads had been chased over the years. At least 10 possible identities had been ruled out. Facial reconstructions were commissioned and released in 1985, again in 2013, again in 2015. Each time, the public's attention spiked briefly and then faded. The case remained cold. But in 2017, everything changed. It started with a woman named Denise Baudin. She had vanished from Manchester, New Hampshire in November 1981, last seen by her family over Thanksgiving in nearby Goffstown. She had been living with a boyfriend who went by the name Robert Evans, or sometimes Bob Evans. When Denise disappeared, so did Bob Evans, and so did Denise's infant daughter, a baby girl everyone called Dawn. Dawn turned up in 1986. She was found abandoned in a California RV park and was subsequently adopted. Her name later changed to Lisa. As an adult, Lisa grew curious about her origins. She submitted her DNA to a genealogy database, not knowing what it would find. What it found connected her to a cold case that had been sitting unsolved for more than 3 decades. Lisa was the biological daughter of Denise Baudin and a man named Robert Evans, and the DNA trail led investigators directly to Bear Brook. Robert Evans, it turned out, was not his real name. He had gone by Curtis Kimball in some states, Larry Vanner in others. He was a ghost, a man who seemed to evaporate and reappear under a new identity every time the heat got close. Investigators began calling him the Chameleon Killer. In 2017, they finally identified him. His true name was Terry Peter Rasmussen, born in 1943, a drifter who had spent decades moving across the country, leaving behind a trail of missing women and unanswered questions that stretched from New Hampshire to California. DNA analysis confirmed the most chilling detail of all. One of the children found in the second barrel at Bear Brook, a girl estimated to have been between 2 and 4 years old when she died, was Terry Rasmussen's biological daughter. He had killed his own child, wrapped her in plastic, sealed her in a drum, and left her in the woods.
We believe we have our killer. Now we need to identify and try to find all of his victims.
The problem was that Rasmussen had died in prison in 2010, 7 years before they figured out who he was. He had been convicted in 2002 of murdering and dismembering Yoon Soon Jun, a 45-year-old chemist in California, his then-wife. He died serving a 15-year sentence, never facing justice, for the 4 children in the barrels, never even knowing that investigators had finally learned his real name. Now began one of the most remarkable forensic hunts in modern American criminal history. Investigators knew who the killer was. What they didn't know was who his victims were. That question would take years, a podcast, a librarian from Connecticut, genetic genealogy technology, and tens of thousands of volunteers to answer. In 2018, New Hampshire Public Radio launched a podcast simply called Bear Brook. Reporter Jason Moon documented the investigation in real time, following the breakthroughs as they happened. The show became a phenomenon, downloaded more than 20 million times. Stephen King became a fan. It brought the case to a national audience who had never heard the names Allenstown or Bear Brook, and it generated tips, leads, and attention that investigators credit with cracking the case wide open. One of those listeners was a 34-year-old librarian from Connecticut named Becky Heath. She had no law enforcement background, no forensics training, just a librarian's instinct for research, a deep sense of justice, and access to genealogy databases. Heath dove into the genetic family tree and began building connections that trained investigators had missed. Her work helped point toward the identities of 3 of the 4 victims, a contribution that would prove decisive. In 2019, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office confirmed it. 3 of the 4 Bear Brook victims had been identified. The woman in the first barrel was Marlice Elizabeth Honeychurch. She was in her late 20s. She had been last seen in California in November 1978, when she introduced her family to her new boyfriend, a man who called himself Terry Rasmussen. After that introduction, Marlice's family never saw her again. The 2 girls with her were her daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, approximately 11 years old, and Sarah Lynn McWaters, a younger child. They had vanished with their mother into the void that Rasmussen created everywhere he went. The 4th victim, the small girl in the second barrel, Rasmussen's own daughter, remained unidentified. Investigators called her the middle child. She was estimated to have been between 2 and 4 years old when she was killed. They knew her father was Rasmussen. They knew almost nothing else. Identifying the middle child became an obsession, not just for investigators, but for the entire community that had formed around the Bear Brook case. The DNA Doe Project, a volunteer nonprofit that applies genetic genealogy to unidentified remains, took on her case. Researchers built a family tree of roughly 25,000 people, searching for any connection that might lead to her mother, since her father was already known. The break came in the summer of 2025. A DNA match in the genealogy database led researchers to a couple born in the 1870s. Working forward through their descendants, the team found a 2005 obituary for one of the couple's great-great-great-granddaughters. That obituary listed a surviving daughter named Pepper Reed. Pepper Reed, born in 1952 in Texas. She had not been seen since the late 1970s. It was confirmed. The middle child was Rhea Rasmussen, Pepper Reed's daughter, born in 1976 in Orange County, California. She had been murdered by her own father, Terry Rasmussen, and sealed in a barrel in the woods of New Hampshire, likely sometime between 1978 and 1981. She was at most a few years old. On September 7, 2025, the New Hampshire Attorney General announced that all 4 Bear Brook victims had finally been named. The 40-year search was over, but not quite, because now investigators have a new question. Where is Pepper Reed? What happened to Rhea's mother? Authorities believe she is almost certainly another of Rasmussen's victims, murdered before or after her daughter, her body hidden somewhere still undiscovered. Her disappearance remains an active investigation to this day.
Terry Rasmussen, the chameleon killer, remains one of the most disturbing figures in the history of American true crime, not because of the sheer scale of his murders, but because of their intimacy. Detective Sergeant Chris Elphick of the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit put it plainly: Rasmussen was one of the only serial offenders that killed victims he actually knew and had relationships with. He didn't prey on strangers. He built relationships. He became boyfriends, husbands, partners, and then, when the moment came, he killed. He killed the women who loved him. He killed their children. He killed his own child.
And then he became someone else. Denise Baudin, who vanished from New Hampshire in 1981 with her infant daughter, a daughter he later abandoned in a California RV park, has never been found. Investigators believe her body may be somewhere in New Hampshire. They're still looking. Rasmussen's movements between 1974 and 1985, particularly across New Hampshire, California, Arizona, Texas, Oregon, and Virginia, remain only partially reconstructed. The full accounting of his victims may never be known. What the Bear Brook case gives us as bleak and devastating as it is also a story of what's possible when people refuse to give up. A trooper who went back to a cold crime scene on a hunch, a podcast that reached 20 million listeners, a librarian who built a family tree that cracked the case, a DNA project staffed by volunteers who spent years building a genealogy of 25,000 people just to give one little girl her name back. Rhea Rasmussen, Marlies Honeychurch, Marie Vaughn, Sarah McWaters. They have their names now. They were not forgotten, they were not lost forever. They were found, and they were named, because enough people cared enough to keep looking. If you have any information about Pepper Reed, last seen in the late 1970s, or about Terry Rasmussen's movements between 1974 and 1985, contact the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit at 1-800-525-5555 or by email at coldcaseunitydose.nh.gov. The investigation continues. Thank you for watching True Night Crime. Share this one, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is make sure a name is heard. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. I'm glad you're here because tonight's case is one of the most chilling, most overlooked, and most frustrating cold case clusters in American criminal history. It is no confirmed killer, no final verdict, no real closure, just a string of red-haired women abandoned on roadsides across the American South, their bodies left like afterthoughts beside the thunder of passing 18-wheelers. This is the story of the Redhead murders. Picture the American South in the early 1980s. Reagan is in the White House, the trucking industry is booming after deregulation, and the interstate highway system has turned the country into one long, connected ribbon of asphalt. Truck stops dot the landscape from Tennessee to Arkansas, neon-lit oases in the dark where the desperate and the transient pass through, leaving almost no trace. It's in that world, the world of rest stops and CB radios, of hitchhikers and long-haul routes, that something deeply sinister was happening. Women were disappearing, and then turning up dead. The killings believed to be connected span roughly from 1978 to 1992, though the concentrated cluster that gave the case its name erupted across 1983 to 1985. The victims were found in Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, West Virginia, Mississippi, and Pennsylvania, always near major highways. Always discarded like they didn't matter. Many of them were women on the margins, hitchhikers, sex workers, women with transient lives that made them easy targets and hard to identify. Authorities believe there may have been anywhere from 5 to 14 victims in total. The exact number remains unknown, and nearly all of them had red hair. The case that would anchor the whole investigation was discovered on February 13, 1983. A pair of elderly citizens were driving along Route 250 near Littleton in Wetzel County, West Virginia, when they spotted something on the roadside that stopped them cold. At first they thought it was a mannequin. It wasn't. The body was that of a white woman, naked, estimated to be between 35 and 45 years old. Snow covered the ground around her, but not her body, meaning she had been placed there recently, after the last snowfall. Tire tracks and footprints nearby confirmed what investigators already suspected. She hadn't died there. She had been killed somewhere else and transported to this location, then dumped. Her cause of death was undetermined. She had not been sexually assaulted. Her hair was auburn, not fire engine red, but close enough. And despite extensive efforts, she was never identified. She remains a Jane Doe to this day. At the time, she was just one case in one county in one state. It wouldn't be until 1985, when bodies started piling up across multiple states, that investigators began connecting dots, and even then, only reluctantly. By 1984 and into 1985, something undeniable was happening along the interstates of the American South. On September 16, 1984, the strangled body of 28-year-old Lisa Nichols was found along Interstate 40 near West Memphis, Arkansas. Nichols was from West Virginia and had strawberry blonde hair. She was identified in June of 1985, one of the few victims who would be named relatively quickly. Then came New Year's Day, 1985. A woman's body was found near Jellicoe, Tennessee, just beyond a guardrail off Interstate 75 in Campbell County. She was clothed, she was pregnant, she had red hair, and she had been dead for several days. Nobody knew who she was. Local law enforcement began putting up posters across Kentucky, reaching out to state police in neighboring states. That's when Kentucky called back.
Yeah, we have one too.
And then Arkansas, and then Mississippi, and then Ohio. In March of 1985, skeletonized remains of another red-haired woman were found alongside Interstate 24 in Tennessee. In April, 2 more bodies. One was found stuffed inside a white refrigerator left along Route 25 in Knox County, Kentucky. Iskr, do bike to fine, and awaken ha nant. The other was discovered in Greene County, Tennessee, with light brown hair streaked with red, killed by blunt force trauma. Neither was ever identified. That same April, law enforcement officials from Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, and other affected states sat down together and made a formal request to the FBI for help. What had begun as isolated local tragedies had become a regional nightmare. The press gave it a name: the Redhead Murders. This is the part of the story that gets overlooked, not the killer, not the investigation, but the victims themselves, because behind every Jane Doe tag, every set of unidentified skeletal remains, there is a real person with a name, a family, and a life that mattered. The woman found on New Year's Day 1985 in Campbell County. It took more than 30 years to identify her. She was Tina Marie McKinney Farmer, a 21-year-old from Indiana who was pregnant when she was killed. Her family had been searching for her, and for decades she lay in a grave marked only by a case number. SB Regina Black Pilgrim was found in a refrigerator in Kentucky. It took until 2017 before a woman from North Carolina called investigators, believing that Jane Doe might be her mother. She was right. Pilgrim had last been seen in the middle of the night at a truck stop in Kentucky, seeking a ride to North Carolina. A witness recalled someone on the CB radio offering her a lift. That was the last anyone heard of her. Lisa Nichols, Michelle Lavone Inman, and others have since been named, identified through decades of work, new DNA technology, and the dogged persistence of investigators who refuse to let these cases go cold forever. But some remain nameless. The Cheatham County Jane Doe, whose remains were found in March 1985 along I-24 West in Pleasant View, Tennessee, discovered by a motorist with car trouble, has only recently been identified. After years of effort, others still have no name, no family, no closure. They were dismissed at the time as women on the margins, hitchhikers, prostitutes. The kind of victims, investigators admitted, that society made it easier to forget. As one journalist who spent years covering the case put it, the world forgot about these women because they were deemed as throwaways. They were not throwaways. They were human beings. Now, the man who law enforcement eventually focused on, a long-haul trucker from Cleveland, Tennessee, named Jerry Leon Johns. Here's where the story takes a turn that is both satisfying and deeply frustrating. On March 6, 1985, a woman named Linda Shack walked into a police station in Knox County, Tennessee, and reported something horrifying. She told officers that a 37-year-old trucker had picked her up, driven her to a remote location, and then tried to kill her. He had torn a strip of cloth from her own shirt and wrapped it tightly around her neck, strangling her until she lost consciousness. Then he had dumped what he believed to be her corpse beside Interstate 40. She survived. She crawled out of the drainage culvert where she'd been left, made it to the highway, and flagged down help. She gave police the man's name, the motel where he was staying, his room number. Jerry Leon Johns was arrested and convicted in 1987 on charges of aggravated kidnapping and assault. He received a 35-year sentence. But here's the critical detail. Shockey also had red hair. And Johns, investigators noted with unease, had been furious to discover that she dyed it, that she wasn't a natural redhead, furious enough to kill. Johns was immediately considered a suspect in the Redhead murders. Investigators knew he operated long-haul routes across exactly the states where victims had been found. His personality fit the profile: arrogant, condescending with police, boastful about his knowledge of serial killers. Former TBI agent Dave Davenport, who worked the case in the 1980s, described Johns as someone who acted like he was smarter than everyone else, but they couldn't prove it. Johns went to prison on the Shockey charges. The redhead murder cases went cold. For years, nothing. The case files collected dust. The Jane Does lay in graves with no names. Families wondered, and the killer, if there was just one, was either still out there or already dead. Jerry Leon Johns died in prison in December 2015. It looked like the truth might have died with him. Then, in 2016, TBI Special Agent Brandon Elkins, who had been working this case for over a decade, resubmitted DNA evidence from the Tina Farmer case to the TBI Crime Lab. Modern forensic techniques had advanced enormously since the 1980s. This time, the DNA on Farmer's clothing and blanket returned a match. Jerry Leon Johns. A Campbell County grand jury convened in December 2019 and ruled that, had Johns been alive, there was sufficient evidence to indict him for first-degree murder in Tina Farmer's death. He was formally named her killer, posthumously, and with no possibility of prosecution. Justice, in the most hollow form imaginable. As for the other victims, TBI investigators have been careful. Agent Elkins told reporters that while they remain open to the possibility Johns was involved in additional cases, there is no definitive proof connecting him to the other redhead murders at this time. The DNA solved one case, the rest remain open. One of the most remarkable chapters in this entire investigation doesn't involve the FBI, the TBI, or any law enforcement agency. It involves a high school sociology class in Elizabethton, Tennessee. In 2018, a teacher named Alex Campbell assigned his students to investigate the redhead murders as a class project. These teenagers gathered information from multiple police agencies, consulted with an FBI behavioral profiler, and sat down to analyze the evidence for themselves. Their conclusion: 6 murders were definitively linked. Their suspect profile: a truck driver based in Knoxville, likely someone who lured vulnerable women from truck stops, killed them with his bare hands, and disposed of their bodies along the interstates he routinely traveled. They sent their 8-page profile to every investigating agency. Law enforcement took notice. FBI behavioral analysts and criminal justice experts reviewed the students' findings and agreed the profile was credible. The class continued into subsequent years, with new cohorts of students picking up where the last left off, working to identify the remaining Jane Does, cross-referencing missing persons databases, keeping the pressure on. "It was really inspiring," one student said. "Like, I'm doing work to help people. This is real." High schoolers doing what multiple law enforcement agencies across 6 states struggled to coordinate for decades. Let that sink in. So where does that leave us today? The honest answer is, in a deeply unsatisfying place. One murder is solved. Tina Farmer, killed by Jerry Leon Johns. 4. Jane Does have now been identified by name, thanks to advances in genetic genealogy and persistent investigative work. But the killer, or killers, behind the broader cluster of redhead murders has never been officially named, charged, or convicted in connection with the pattern as a whole. Was it one person? Investigators who worked the case in the 80s lean toward yes. The similarities are too striking. Bodies dumped along interstates, victims with reddish hair, victims from transient or vulnerable populations, a killing method centered on strangulation. Former TBI agent Davenport told reporters that because of the similarities in how the bodies were found and disposed of, he believes it was probably the same truck driver or traveling person. But there's another possibility. Serial killing researchers have noted that the interstate highway system created a perfect environment for multiple predators operating independently, each targeting a similar victim pool, each leaving bodies along the same roads. It's possible that what investigators are looking at isn't one killer, but 2 or 3, moving through the same hunting grounds. In 2022, another trucker, Henry Frederick Hoss Wise, was identified through DNA as the killer of at least one victim linked to this cluster, suggesting that the redhead murders may indeed be the work of more than one predator. The highway, it turns out, is a long and dark place. The redhead murders remain one of the defining unsolved cases of 1980s America. A case that exposes how vulnerable women on the margins of society can fall through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to look for them, and how, even decades later, the work of naming them, finding justice for them, often falls to the dogged few who refuse to let the files close. Some of these women now have names, some still don't. All of them deserve better. Better from their killer, better from the systems that overlooked them, and better from a society that moved on too quickly. If you have any information related to the Redhead murders, any of the victims, any of the cases, you can contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. These cases are still open, the families are still waiting. Thank you for watching True Night Crime. If this episode moved you, share it, because sometimes the best investigative tool is simply making sure people know. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. In the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. And tonight, we're going somewhere you might not expect. Not the foggy streets of a rain-soaked city, not the desolate back roads of rural America. Tonight, we're going to Hawaii. Because even paradise has a dark side. Between May 1985 and April 1986, 5 women were raped, strangled, and dumped across the island of Oahu. Their hands were bound behind their backs. Their bodies were left near lagoons, streams, and roadsides. They had no connection to each other. They didn't know each other. The only thing they shared was that a killer had chosen them, opportunistically, methodically, and without mercy. The press called him the Honolulu Strangler. Law enforcement called him Hawaii's first known serial killer, and to this day, he has never been officially identified, never been charged, and never faced justice for what he did. This is his story, and more importantly, it's theirs. To understand why the Honolulu Strangler case was so shocking, you have to understand what Hawaii, and Oahu, specifically, represented in the American imagination in the mid-1980s. Think about it. Shows like Hawaii, 5-0, and Magnum P.I. had spent years painting the island as a sun-drenched paradise where the worst crime was an international smuggling ring that always got wrapped up before the credits rolled. Tourism was booming. Between 1985 and 1986, more than 10 million people visited Hawaii. The military presence on Oahu was massive. Army, Navy, and Marine Corps installations dotted the island. The telecom industry was exploding, drawing thousands of migrant workers from the mainland. Honolulu was growing, buzzing, alive. It was not the kind of place where people expected a serial killer to be hunting women in the dark. And that, as investigators would later reflect, may have been exactly what made it possible for him to operate as long as he did. The first victim was Vicki Gale Purdy. She was 25 years old, blonde, petite, and by all accounts full of fire. Her husband Gary was a chief warrant officer and helicopter pilot with the U.S. Army's 24th Aviation Battalion, stationed on Oahu. The couple had been in Hawaii for just over a year. Vicki had grown up in North Carolina, spent time in foster care as a child, and built herself into someone tough and self-reliant. She worked at a video rental store in Wahiawa. She had dreams. She had a life she was building. On the night of May 29, 1985, Vicki went out clubbing in the Waikiki district. She was supposed to meet friends. A taxi driver dropped her off at the Shorebird Hotel around midnight. She had gone back, it seemed, to retrieve her car from the parking lot. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. The next morning, her body was found at Kihei Lagoon, a sprawling urban beach park on the south shore of Oahu. She was still wearing her yellow jumpsuit. Her hands were bound tightly behind her back. She had been raped and strangled. Police investigated. Her husband mentioned that her job at the video store, which also handled adult material, had put her in contact with some unsavory characters. 2 women had been stabbed to death at a similar store nearby just a year before. Investigators chased those threads. They found nothing. Vicki Purdy's case, for months, went nowhere. And then, 7 months later, the killer struck again. Her name was Regina Sakamoto. She was 17 years old, quiet, studious, described by people who knew her as shy but warm, the kind of girl who had plans. She wanted to go to university in the fall. On the morning of January 14, 1986, she missed her school bus. It happened. So, she took local transit instead, heading to school on Oahu's public bus system. She was seen waiting at the Waipahu bus stop. She never made it to school. The following morning, her body was found at Kihei Lagoon, less than a mile from where Vicki Purdy had been found 7 months earlier. Regina was partially nude. Her hands were bound behind her back. She had been raped and strangled. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Same lagoon, same binding, same cause of death. Honolulu homicide detectives began for the first time to use the words nobody wanted to say out loud. Serial killer. They didn't have to wait long for confirmation. Just 2 weeks after Regina Sakamoto's body was found, 21-year-old Denise Hughes went missing. She was a secretary for a phone company, married to a military man. On January 30th, she didn't show up for work. 3 young fishermen found her body the next day along Moana Lua Stream. She was clothed in a blue dress, wrapped in a blue tarp. Her hands were bound. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. 3 victims, 3 bound women, 3 strangulations, all within miles of each other on the same island. On February 5, 1986, the Honolulu Police Department made it official. They established a 27-person serial killer task force under the Criminal Investigative Division, with direct assistance from the FBI. For a city that had never publicly faced a serial killer before, it was a watershed moment, and a terrifying one. The task force got to work building a profile of their unknown subject, and what they came up with was chilling in its precision. The killer, the FBI's behavioral science unit concluded, was an opportunist, not a stalker. He wasn't following women for days or weeks before striking. He was watching for vulnerability, for a woman alone in the wrong place at the wrong moment. A parking lot, a bus stop. Late at night, on a quiet stretch of road. He saw his chance, and he took it. He was likely Caucasian or of mixed ancestry, probably between 30 and 40 years old. He drove a cargo van, crucial detail, which gave him the means to move victims without attracting attention. He lived or worked somewhere between Sand Island and Waipahu, the areas near his known dumping grounds. He was organized enough to leave very little evidence, but opportunistic enough that he wasn't selecting victims well in advance, and, the profilers believed, he was experiencing some form of relationship conflict, trouble with a girlfriend or wife, around the time of the killings. No prior criminal record, they predicted. It was a profile that fit, hauntingly well, exactly one man who would eventually step into the investigation himself. But before we get to him, there were 2 more victims. Louise Medeiros was 25 years old and 3 months pregnant. She had traveled to Kauai to be with her extended family after the death of her mother. On the night of March 26, 1986, she boarded a late flight back to Oahu, and told her family she'd get home by bus from the airport. She never arrived. She was reported missing, and road workers found her decomposing body on April 2nd near Waikol Stream, under a freeway overpass. Her blouse was still on. Her lower body was unclothed. Her hands were bound behind her back. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The city of Honolulu was gripped by fear. The police set up sting operations. Policewomen positioned near Kihei Lagoon and the Honolulu International Airport, the 2 locations that kept appearing in this case. Roadblocks were established. Women were publicly warned to avoid public transportation alone, particularly at night. The newspaper headlines were stark and terrifying. In a city defined by warmth and welcome, no one felt safe. And then came Linda Pesci. Linda was 36 years old, described by those who knew her as streetwise and tough. She had moved to Hawaii after a divorce, was raising a daughter, and was working hard to build a new life. On the night of April 29, 1986, her car broke down along a stretch of highway. Witnesses later told police they saw a cream-colored, American-made cargo van parked beside her disabled car, and a man of medium build, late 30s to 40s, Caucasian or mixed race, apparently offering assistance. She was never seen alive again. On May 3rd, her nude body was found on Sand Island, a small island at the entrance to Honolulu Harbor. Her hands were bound. She had been strangled. 5 women in just under a year, and then, the murders stopped. On May 9, 1986, a man walked into the Honolulu Police Department with a startling claim. He said he'd been told by a psychic the location of a missing woman's body. He was willing to take police there. His name was Howard Andrew Gay. He was 43 years old. Gay led investigators to Sand Island. He walked them around the island, conspicuously avoiding one particular area. Police, growing more suspicious by the minute, pushed toward the spot he was skirting, and there she was, Linda Pesci. Gay was arrested that same day, on suspicion of murder. What emerged during the investigation was a picture of a man who fit the FBI profile with unnerving precision. Gay was a military veteran, honorably discharged in 1985 from the Air Force. He had worked at an air cargo operation near the Honolulu airport, giving him access to cargo vans, strapping tape and zip ties, materials that matched the restraints used on the victims. His work location placed him squarely in the geographic corridor the profilers had identified. Then came the detail that made investigators' skin crawl. Gay's ex-wife and his girlfriend, interviewed separately, both told police that he had a sexual fetish for bondage. Specifically, that he liked to tie women's hands behind their backs during sex. The same position in which every single victim had been found. His girlfriend also told investigators something else. On the nights they had fights and Gay stormed out of the house, she had started paying attention to the dates. Those nights, she said, corresponded with the nights the murders occurred. A woman came forward who said she had seen Gay with Linda Pesci on the night of her death. She identified him from a photo lineup without hesitation. She told police, absolutely certain, but she refused to testify in court. She was terrified. She believed Gay had seen her too. And without her testimony, the case against Howard Gay collapsed. There was not enough physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, nothing that placed him irrefutably at a crime scene. The forensic tools that might have convicted him simply did not exist yet, or were not available in the way they would be a decade later. He was released. The killings never resumed. Police monitored Gay for years. A $25,000 reward was offered by private businesses for information leading to a conviction. Tips came in and were chased down. None of them led anywhere. In June 1986, Gay left Hawaii and returned to California to attend his son Jason's graduation. While there, Jason was killed in a car accident. Gay, by several accounts, was shattered. He became a born-again Christian in the aftermath. He eventually settled on the mainland and never returned to Hawaii. Howard Andrew Gay died of kidney failure on November 2, 2003, in California. He was 60 years old. He was never charged. He was never prosecuted. He died, as far as the law was concerned, an innocent man.
Former Homicide Lieutenant Gary Diaz, who headed HPD's Homicide Division during the killings, spoke plainly about it years later. The department believed they had their man. Based on the evidence we had, and the witnesses we had, and the physical evidence, we felt we had enough, he said. What they lacked, he acknowledged, was DNA. DNA could have changed everything.
So where does that leave us today? The Honolulu Strangler case remains officially open. The Honolulu Police Department maintains that 5 victims are definitively linked and continues to solicit tips from the public. Modern forensic tools, genetic genealogy, advanced DNA analysis, the kind of technology that has cracked cold cases across the country in recent years, have not yet produced a breakthrough here. In 2025, Hawaii enacted new legislation addressing the use of consumer genetic information in genealogical investigations, potentially opening the door to familial DNA searches in cold cases like this one. Whether that will ever produce a result in the Strangler case remains to be seen. What is not in doubt is what was lost. Vicky Purdy, 25, a woman who grew up tough and dreamed of a life in the islands. Regina Sakamoto, 17, who missed a bus on a school morning and never came home. Denise Hughes, 21, found by 3 young boys on a stream bank. Louise Medeiros, 25, 3 months pregnant, traveling home from a family funeral. Linda Pesci, 36, whose car broke down in the wrong place at the wrong time. 5 women, 1 year, an entire city changed. Hawaii had always told itself a certain story. That it was paradise, that darkness like this happened somewhere else. The Honolulu Strangler shattered that story, and because he was never brought to justice, the shattering was never quite repaired. The Honolulu Strangler remains one of the most haunting cold cases in American history, not just because of its brutality, but because of its setting, because it reminds us that no place, no matter how beautiful, is immune to the worst of what human beings can do to one another. Howard Gay died in 2003. If he was the Strangler, he took his secrets with him. If he wasn't, if the real killer is still out there, or died elsewhere quietly, then 5 women and their families never got so much as an official acknowledgement of who was responsible. If you have any information about the Honolulu Strangler case, the Honolulu Police Department Cold Case Unit is still accepting tips. These cases are still open. These 5 women still deserve answers. Thank you for watching True Night Crime. If this episode stayed with you, please share it. Because sometimes the only thing standing between a cold case and justice is someone, somewhere, remembering. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time, in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. Tonight's case is different from everything we've covered so far, because tonight, we're not just looking at a crime, we're looking at a theory. A theory that is either one of the most important unsolved criminal conspiracies in modern American history, or one of the most compelling examples of grieving people searching for meaning in senseless tragedy. Maybe both, maybe neither. Here is what we know for certain. Since the late 1990s, dozens of young men, athletic, intelligent, popular, most of them college students, have vanished after nights out drinking with friends and turned up dead in rivers, lakes, and waterways across the United States. Their deaths were ruled accidental drownings. Their families said something was wrong, and a pair of retired New York City detectives agreed. They called the killers the smiley face killers. And the symbol, that simple, grinning yellow face, keeps turning up at the water's edge. It begins in 1997 on the Upper East Side of Manhattan at a bar called the Dapper Dog. Patrick McNeil was 23 years old, a student at Fordham University. He was out with friends, drinking, having a normal Friday night. At some point in the evening, he became extremely intoxicated, sick enough to be throwing up in the bar's bathroom. He stepped outside to wait for a friend to take him home. The friend came out minutes later. Patrick was gone. 2 months later, Patrick McNeil's body was found floating in the East River, roughly 12 miles from the bar. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death an undetermined drowning, citing his high blood alcohol content, the implication being that a drunk Patrick had wandered to the river's edge and fallen in. NYPD Detective Kevin Gannon caught the case, and from the beginning, something about the official conclusion didn't sit right with him. Gannon walked the area himself. The river wasn't easily accessible from where Patrick had been. There were barriers, fencing, no obvious path a stumbling drunk man would have taken in the dark. More troubling, an autopsy examination revealed what appeared to be binding marks on Patrick's body. And evidence suggesting he had died before entering the water, not from the water itself. Gannon made a promise to Patrick McNeil's parents. He would keep working. He would find out what happened to their son. He joined forces with fellow NYPD detective Anthony Duarte, and over the years, as more young men disappeared and turned up drowned, they kept asking the same questions. Were these accidents, or were they something else? The pattern, once you start looking for it, is genuinely alarming. Over the following years and into the 2000s, the bodies of young men began appearing in waterways across the Midwest and Northeast. They were almost always white, almost always male, almost always between the ages of 18 and 25. Almost always athletic, academically successful, from good families. They all disappeared after nights out at bars or parties. They were reported missing for days or weeks. And then, the water gave them back. The deaths were ruled accidental drownings, virtually without exception. Law enforcement in the cities involved concluded the men had been drinking heavily, become confused or disoriented, stumbled into a river, and drowned. It was tragic. It was not, officials said, suspicious. But the families knew their sons. And they kept saying, something is wrong. The roster of suspected victims grew. Christopher Jenkins, 21, vanished from Minneapolis after a Halloween night out in 2002 and was found in the Mississippi River 4.5 months later. Dakota James, 23, disappeared from Pittsburgh in 2017 and was pulled from the Ohio River 40 days later, showing decomposition consistent with only 2 or 3 days in the water. Josh Gamond, a 20-year-old St. John's University student in Minnesota, vanished in 2002 after a party on campus and has never been found at all. College students in Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, young men with their whole lives ahead of them, gone. By the time Gannon and Duarte went public with their findings in 2008, joined by Dr. Lee Gilbertson, a criminal justice professor and gang expert at St. Cloud State University, they had identified more than 40 cases they believed were connected. They called the network responsible the Smiley Face Killers, and they explained how they had gotten that name. Near the sites where investigators believed bodies had been dumped into the water, Gannon and Duarte kept finding graffiti, specifically smiley faces, simple, spray-painted grinning circles in varying colors and styles, at locations across 12 or more of the cases. They argued these were not coincidental. They were signatures, markers, left by killers who were organized enough, arrogant enough, to tag their dumping sites. The theory they presented was chilling. This was not, they argued, the work of a single killer, but a network, a gang with cells operating independently in multiple cities. The men are targeted at bars and parties, Gannon and Duarte said. Drugged, often with GHB, the date rape drug, then abducted, held for a period of time, killed, and placed in the water to disguise the manner of death. The water washes away evidence, and toxicology screens at the time rarely tested for GHB. The decomposition timelines were perhaps the most concrete piece of evidence they presented. Dakota James was missing for 40 days, but his body showed decomposition of only around 3 days. Todd Geib had been missing for 21 days, but showed decomposition of approximately 2.5 days. The bodies, Gannon argued, had not been in the water for the duration of the men's disappearances. They had been somewhere else, and then placed in the water. The lack of decomposition on the bodies is inconsistent with the period of time that the victims are missing, Gannon explained to investigators and journalists. The FBI reviewed the theory and issued a statement. They had found no evidence to support the conclusion that these deaths were linked or that they were the work of a serial killer or killers. The vast majority, the Bureau said, appeared to be alcohol-related drownings. Local law enforcement was equally skeptical. The La Crosse, Wisconsin Police Department, which oversaw 8 of the drowning cases Gannon and Duarte were examining, stated flatly that their investigations had found no smiley face symbols at the relevant sites, and that the deaths were consistent with accidental drowning in inebriated individuals. Criminologists and statisticians pushed back further. Young men, they pointed out, are statistically far more likely to engage in risky behavior while intoxicated. They are overrepresented in drowning deaths nationally for exactly this reason. Binge drinking near waterways is not uncommon among college students. The fact that many victims had been drinking before they disappeared does not by itself suggest anything sinister. And smiley face graffiti, critics noted, is not rare. It is one of the most common pieces of graffiti in the world. If you look in any area 5 miles square, I bet you could find a smiley face, said one skeptic. Gannon and Duarte pushed back on this, arguing they had specifically examined areas both connected and unconnected to the suspicious deaths, and found a meaningful discrepancy in the presence of smiley face imagery near water sites. Dr. Ruben Rosario of the St. Paul Pioneer Press questioned Gannon's motives publicly, noting that even some of the parents of the deceased had moved toward skepticism over time, and that the theory had not produced a single arrest in decades. But here is the thing that keeps this theory alive, keeps investigators and families up at night, and keeps it from being dismissed entirely. One of the cases was reclassified. Christopher Jenkins disappeared from Minneapolis on Halloween night in 2002. He was 21 years old, an athletic, popular college student. His body was found in the Mississippi River in February 2003, nearly 4.5 months after he vanished. Minneapolis police initially ruled his death an accidental drowning. His family never accepted it. In 2020, 18 years later, the Minneapolis Police Department reclassified Christopher Jenkins's death as a homicide. A convicted felon had made statements indicating foul play in the case. The manner of death on Jenkins's record was formally changed. No arrests have been made, but the reclassification was significant. It meant that at least one family's insistence that their son had been murdered had been officially validated. It didn't prove the smiley face theory. It didn't confirm a gang or a network or a conspiracy, but it confirmed what that family had always said, that Christopher Jenkins did not simply fall into a river. Gannon and Duarte have spent years, retirement funds, and personal savings chasing this theory. Gannon, by multiple accounts, mortgaged his home and maxed out his credit cards continuing the investigation. He battled cancer for 18 months and came back to the case when he recovered. He and Gilbertson co-authored a forensic textbook on drowning deaths. They testified, consulted, appeared at conferences, and briefed law enforcement agencies across the country. Their list of suspected victims has grown significantly since 2008. By some accounts, it now encompasses hundreds of cases of suspicious drowning deaths across the United States and into Canada and Europe. Critics say this expansion reveals the theory's weakness, that as it grows to accommodate more cases, it loses analytical rigor and starts to resemble pattern finding rather than pattern discovery. Proponents argue it reveals the theory's horror. The Oxygen docu-series that aired in 2019 brought the story to a wide television audience, revisiting 6 specific cases in detail. Some of the families featured said the show gave them, for the first time, investigators who were willing to truly listen. Others remained cautious about what the show could deliver in the absence of an arrest, a charge, or a conviction. The uncomfortable truth at the center of all of this is that we do not have the tools to definitively settle the question either way. Drowning as a cause of death is genuinely difficult to prove or disprove after the fact, particularly when bodies are recovered from moving water after extended periods. GHB metabolizes quickly and is routinely excluded from standard postmortem toxicology panels. The window for physical evidence closes fast, and without a named suspect, a verified link between cases, or a conviction, the theory remains exactly that, a theory. Here is where that leaves us. Dozens of families across the United States believe their sons were murdered. A pair of decorated retired detectives with decades of law enforcement experience believe the same. The FBI and local police disagree. The science is genuinely murky, and nobody has been arrested. What's clear is that these young men are real. Patrick McNeil, Christopher Jenkins, Dakota James, Josh Gammond, and dozens of others. Real people, with real families, who went out one night and didn't come home. Whether they were victims of an organized group of killers or victims of alcohol and dark water and devastating coincidence, they deserve better investigations than they got. Their families deserve more than closed files and official verdicts that leave questions unanswered. If you have any information about any of the suspected smiley face killers cases, investigators Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte continue to accept tips and case referrals. And if you're watching this and one of these stories reminds you of something you saw or something you know, speak up. For these families, it has never been too late to try. Thank you for watching True Night Crime. Think critically, question everything, and remember, an official ruling is not always the final word. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. Tonight we're driving down a highway in Virginia, a stretch of American road so ordinary, so unremarkable, that millions of people travel it every year without a second thought. It runs from the suburbs of Washington, D.C., down through the rolling hills and farmland of central Virginia, all the way toward Charlottesville. U.S. Route 29. In 1996, a man who called himself Larry Breeden turned that highway into a hunting ground. He had a method, a target type, and what investigators would later describe as a fantasy. A dark, compulsive fantasy that he had been rehearsing for weeks before it turned lethal. He stopped women on the side of the road. He told them their cars had problems. He offered help. And then, when the moment came, he showed them exactly what kind of help he had in mind. His real name has never been established. He was never charged with a crime. He was never convicted. And the one woman whose murder he is believed to have committed, a 25-year-old Johns Hopkins graduate student named Alicia Showalter Reynolds, has still, 30 years later, never received justice. This is her story. Alicia Showalter Reynolds was the kind of person who made the people around her better just by being there. She had grown up in Harrisonburg, Virginia, earned her undergraduate degree at Goshen College, and by 1996 was a doctoral student in pharmacology at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. She was working on a research project aimed at developing vaccines to fight bacterial infections in developing countries. She was committed, focused, brilliant, described by her father, Harley, as someone who could have changed the world if given the chance. On the morning of Saturday, March 2, 1996, Alicia kissed her husband Mark goodbye and set out from Baltimore just after 7:30 a.m. She was driving more than 150 miles to spend the day shopping with her mother Sadie at a mall in Charlottesville. It was a simple Saturday plan, a mother-daughter trip, the kind of ordinary thing that happens millions of times in this country every weekend. She was due to meet Sadie at 10:30 a.m. She never arrived. Sadie waited. An hour passed. She called Mark, who assumed the weather might have caused delays. Sadie waited longer. The morning stretched into afternoon. By early evening, with still no word, alarm had given way to something worse. Around 6 p.m., about 50 miles from Charlottesville near Culpeper County, Alicia's white Mercury Tracer was found parked on the southbound shoulder of Route 29. The hood was up. A napkin had been placed on the windshield suggesting car trouble, but when mechanics examined the car, they found nothing wrong with it. Witnesses who had driven past that stretch of road recalled seeing Alicia standing near the vehicle, talking to a man whose dark pickup truck was parked nearby. Some saw her climb into his truck. She was never seen alive again. What investigators uncovered in the days and weeks after Alicia's disappearance was deeply alarming, because it turned out that March the 2nd was not this man's first time on that highway, not even close. As news of Alicia's abduction spread, women began coming forward. One by one, then in a flood. By the time Virginia State Police had gathered all the accounts, they had documented nearly 20 separate incidents, all occurring between February and March of 1996, all along the Route 29 corridor between Manassas and Charlottesville. In every case, the method was the same. A man in a dark pickup truck would get a woman's attention by honking his horn and flashing his headlights. When she pulled over, he would tell her something was wrong with her car. Sparks flying underneath, something rattling loose. He offered a ride. He was calm, reassuring, helpful in manner. Some women accepted and were driven safely to a nearby phone without incident. Others sensed something wrong and refused, driving away. When they ignored him, witnesses said, he became visibly furious before finally driving off. He was practicing. Investigators came to believe he was refining the approach. Working out what worked, what didn't, calibrating his method until it was smooth enough to be lethal. The Route 29 stops were, in the clinical language of the FBI, rehearsals. 1 week before Alicia disappeared, the rehearsal had already turned violent. A woman from Quantico was driving home along Virginia Route 234 near Dumfries, when a man in a small blue truck flagged her down. He gave the same story: sparks, car trouble. And she accepted his offer of a ride. Within minutes he attacked her, threatening her with a screwdriver and grabbing her head. She fought back, jumped from the moving vehicle, and broke her ankle on the pavement. She survived. Her attacker drove off. On May 7, 1996, 2 months after Alicia vanished, a man noticed vultures circling a clear-cut timber field near Lignum in Culpeper County, about 15 miles southeast of where Alicia's car had been found. He investigated. He found her body. Her cause of death has never been publicly released by investigators. A deliberate decision, held back to protect the integrity of any future prosecution. What police confirmed was that she had been murdered, almost certainly on the day she disappeared. Her killer had known enough about the local landscape to choose that isolated field, a location, investigators noted, that would have been known mainly to locals. Someone who knew the area, someone who had been there before. The man who gave his name to at least 2 of the women he stopped on Route 29 called himself Larry Breeden. Police announced this detail publicly, hoping someone would recognize the name. The result was grimly ironic. Several real men, named Larry Breeden, living in Virginia, found themselves fielding calls from state police, their names suddenly linked to a wanted killer. Every actual Larry Breeden was investigated and cleared. The name, like everything else about the suspect, turned out to be a dead end. The composite sketch released by Virginia State Police showed a white male, 35 to 45 years old, between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, medium build, with reddish-brown hair. Witnesses remembered one distinctive habit: he frequently brushed his hair back with his left hand. He drove a dark-colored pickup, possibly a black or dark green Nissan. He wore a wedding ring. He had a calm, confident manner that made women feel safe enough to get into his truck. He was, the FBI's behavioral scientists concluded, a man who was enacting a sexual fantasy, and who almost certainly hadn't intended for that fantasy to end in Alicia Reynolds' death. The investigation that followed generated more than 10,000 tips over the years. Everyone was pursued. None produced a conviction. The most prominent suspect to emerge was a Maryland man named Darrell David Rice, a former computer technician from Howard County. Rice had a father who lived near the Route 29 corridor and drove a pickup truck matching the description witnesses gave. In July 1997, Rice was arrested for attempting to abduct a female bicyclist in Shenandoah National Park. A guy crime down zoren down crime. I'm down for boy kind ban dancer and boy kurten durizober mine shajan. Abad Kreinstein would eventually serve a 10-year federal prison sentence. The woman from the Route 234 attack, the one who broke her ankle escaping from the truck, identified Rice as the man who had attacked her. In 2005, Rice pleaded no contest to charges in that attack and received 11 months in jail. Rice was never charged in Alicia Reynolds' death. In 2002, Rice had briefly been indicted on capital murder charges in the separate killings of 2 female hikers, Julianne Williams and Laura Lolly Winans, who were found murdered at their campsite in Shenandoah National Park in May 1996, just weeks after Alicia disappeared. That case collapsed when prosecutors couldn't produce sufficient forensic evidence. Complicating matters further, forensic testing had failed to rule out another known serial killer, Richard Mark Evanitz, as the source of hair evidence found at the park scene. Richard Mark Evanitz is the other shadow that has always loomed over this case. He was active in the exact same region at the exact same time, responsible for the abduction and murder of 3 young girls from Spotsylvania County, Virginia, in 1996 and 1997. Alicia's mother, Sadie, has long voiced the family's suspicion that Evanitz was behind her daughter's death as well. "You usually don't have 2 serial killers around the same area, around the same time," she said. Evanitz committed suicide in June 2002, shooting himself as police closed in on him in Florida. He took whatever he knew to his grave. Route 29 did not become safer after Alicia. In the years and decades that followed, the corridor became synonymous with danger for young women in Virginia. Anne Carolyn McDaniel vanished in September 1996. Her burned remains were found just 10 miles from where Alicia's body had been discovered. Julianne Williams and Lolly Winans were murdered in the nearby Shenandoah National Park that same May. Morgan Harrington, a Virginia Tech student, disappeared near Charlottesville in 2009 and was found murdered months later. Her killer, Jesse Matthew, was eventually convicted. Hannah Graham, a University of Virginia student, was abducted in Charlottesville in 2014. Matthew was convicted in that case too. Between 1996 and 2014, 9 young women vanished or were murdered along or near the Route 29 corridor. Only 3 of those cases resulted in convictions. The others remain open. Whether they are connected, whether one hand or many were responsible, is a question investigators have never been able to definitively answer. What is certain is that in the spring of 1996, a man with reddish-brown hair and a dark pickup truck treated a 60-mile stretch of Virginia highway as his personal hunting ground. He stopped 20 women, most escaped, 1 did not. Alicia Showalter Reynolds was 25 years old. She was a scientist working to make the world better. She had a husband who loved her, a mother who waited for her, a father who still speaks about her with a grief that 3 decades have not dulled. My message would be, why hide? Her father Harley told a reporter years after her death. You've been hidden long enough. 30 years on, the Route 29 stalker is still hidden. He may be dead, he may be old, he may be someone who went on to live a completely ordinary life after March 2nd, 1996, carrying what he did in silence. But the case is open. The tips line is still answered. If you were on Route 29 between Manassas and Charlottesville in February or March of 1996, and something you saw never quite left you, call the Virginia State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation at 888-300-0156 or email bci@culpeperevesp.virginia.gov. 30 years is a long time. It is not too late. Thank you for watching True Night Crime. Share this episode because the best chance this case has is someone, somewhere, finally deciding to talk. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time, in the shadows. Welcome to True Night Crime, where we dive deep into the shadows of real mysteries that still haunt us today. Tonight we're going to a city with a long and complicated history, a place that once stood at the center of the American whaling industry, that sheltered freedom seekers on the Underground Railroad, that Herman Melville wrote about in the opening pages of Moby Dick, a city of fishermen and mill workers and a people who have always been defined by resilience. New Bedford, Massachusetts. In 1988, something evil moved through its streets. Between the spring of that year and the following spring, 11 women vanished. 9 bodies were found, dumped along the highways that ring the city. Route 140, Interstate 195, Route 88. Strangled, discarded, left in the woods and bramble just off the roadside like they didn't matter. 2 women have never been found, and the person responsible has never been caught. This is the story of the New Bedford Highway Killer. To understand the New Bedford Highway murders, you have to understand the city they happened in and the moment in history they occurred. By 1988, New Bedford was struggling. The manufacturing sector that had once anchored the economy had eroded, the fishing industry was under pressure, and poverty had taken hold in significant pockets of the city. The poverty rate in New Bedford around that period was well above the Massachusetts state average. With economic decline came desperation, and with desperation came the drug trade. Specifically, heroin, which had carved a devastating path through the city's most vulnerable communities. Weld Square was the heart of it, a neighborhood in the city's south end. Weld Square was where people went to buy, to sell, to survive. Women who were addicted, who had run out of options, who were trying to feed children, or simply get through another day. Many of them worked the streets there, trading sex for the money that would get them to the next hour. They were not invisible to each other. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends. They were people who the broader world had already decided not to see. The New Bedford highway killer found them there, and then he drove them out to the highways and left them. The first body was discovered on July 3, 1988, by a woman who pulled off Massachusetts Route 140 to relieve herself in the woods. What she found in the trees stopped her cold. The remains of a woman, badly decomposed, lying on her back with her feet pointed toward the road. A bra had been wrapped tightly around her neck. She was eventually identified as Deborah Medeiros, 29 years old, from Fall River. She had been missing since May or June. She was the first, but investigators would eventually understand she had not been the first to disappear. 3 weeks later, on July 30th, another body turned up off Interstate 195 in Dartmouth. Nancy Lee Paiva, 36 years old, a mother of 2 daughters aged 13 and 17. She had last been seen leaving Whispers Pub in New Bedford South End on July 7th, after a fight with her boyfriend. She had been walking home. Her sister Judy DeSantos had known something was wrong within days. "I had such a bad feeling," she later said. When Nancy's body was discovered, Judy told reporters, "Every time I go by there, I'm always looking." Nancy Paiva's case was the one that started the alarm bells ringing. Former New Bedford police detective Richard Ferreira and his partner began connecting Nancy's disappearance to other missing women in the area. It didn't take long. "I think we have a serial killer around here," Ferreira recalled thinking. He was right. By the end of 1988, more bodies had been found. Dawn Mendes, 25, discovered off the westbound Reed Road ramp of Interstate 195 on November 29, so badly skeletonized that her remains could only be identified by a fingerprint from her preserved hand. Deborah Lynn McConnell, 25, found in December off Route 140 in Freetown, 7 months after her family had reported her missing. Deborah Greenlaw DeMello, 35, a mother of 2 young children who had been on a work release program from jail when she vanished. Her nude body found off Interstate 195, her clothing strewn in the branches of trees, and among her belongings, items belonging to Nancy Paiva. In mid-December 1988, a dedicated task force was finally formed, involving local police, state troopers, county officials, and prosecutors. The investigation was led on the state police side by troopers Mary Ann Dill and Jose Gonsalves, who would stay with the case through everything that followed. The bodies kept coming into 1989. Mary Rose Santos, 26, found in March along Route 88 in Westport, discovered by 2 boys who stumbled across her nude body in a field, a beer bottle lying nearby. Robin Lynn Rhodes, 29, found in March along Route 140, southbound in Freetown by a search dog. Robin was different from the other victims in one key way. She had not been involved in sex work or drug addiction. She was a friend of many of the others, someone who moved in the same social circles, and she had once dated one of the men who would become the investigation's primary suspect. In total, 9 bodies recovered, 2 women, Christina Montero, 19, and Marilyn Cardoza. Roberts, 34, still missing to this day. Their remains have never been found. The investigation generated 3 primary suspects. Each one is a story in himself. None of them was ever convicted. The first and most intensely investigated was Kenneth Pont, a New Bedford attorney and deputy sheriff. Pont was known to have used drugs heavily and to have frequented the Weld Square area, where the victims were last seen. He had personal connections to several of the women. Robin Lynn Rhodes, whose murder stood out because she was not a sex worker, had previously dated him. When investigators began pulling threads, Ponte's name kept appearing. In August 1990, Ponte was arrested and arraigned on a single count of murder. He proclaimed himself absolutely not guilty and posted a $50,000 bond. Then, in July 1991, the Bristol County District Attorney dropped the murder charge, citing insufficient evidence. The following year, remaining drug and assault charges were also dropped. Kenneth Ponte moved to Florida. He died alone in his New Bedford home in January 2010, never charged, never convicted. When police dug up the driveway and patio of his former home in 2009, searching for evidence, they found nothing. The second suspect was Anthony DeGrazia, and his profile in hindsight is the most chilling. DeGrazia was a 26-year-old construction worker, described by those who knew him as a muscular, flat-nosed man with a troubled childhood marked by abuse and humiliation from his parents. He was charming and religious to some. He attended and served at a Catholic church, but underneath that surface ran a documented current of violence directed exclusively at women, specifically sex workers in the Weld Square area. Between 1988 and 1990, at least 17 women accused DeGrazia of assault, rape, and choking. He was indicted on multiple counts of rape and assault. DNA analysis later confirmed he had paid at least one of the confirmed highway murder victims, Sandra Botelho, for sex. The strangulation method in several of the murders was consistent with his known pattern of attack. In May 1989, a sex worker named Margaret Medeiros told detectives that a man had tried to choke her, and when shown a photo of DeGrazia, she said he looked like the man who attacked her, though she stopped short of a positive identification. She was brought before a secret grand jury to testify. And then, before the investigation could fully close around him, Anthony DeGrazia died. He was found dead at his ex-girlfriend's house in 1991, shortly after being named the primary suspect in the highway killings. The death was officially ruled a homicide, though many who followed the case have long believed DeGrazia took his own life as the walls closed in. He was 28 years old. The truth of whatever he knew died with him. The third suspect emerged from a different direction entirely. Daniel Tavares Jr. was a man already in prison for the murder of his own mother when he wrote a letter to prison staff claiming knowledge of the highway killings. More startling, he was able to direct investigators to the location of a body, that of Sandra Botelho, one of the confirmed victims, buried about a mile from his former home. Tavares claimed he had witnessed Botelho's killing at a party, committed by two acquaintances over a cocaine debt, but insisted he was not the perpetrator. He was later convicted of 2 additional murders in Washington state after being controversially released from Massachusetts prison. No charges were ever filed against him in connection with the New Bedford highway killings. Here is what the investigation confronted. Beyond just the difficulty of the evidence, the victims were women who existed on the margins of society, and the world responded accordingly. Reporter Maureen Boyle was one of the first journalists to cover the highway killings, beginning in 1988, and she stayed with the story for 30 years, ultimately writing the definitive book on the case, Shallow Graves: The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. She has spoken at length about how the victims' backgrounds shaped the investigation and the public response. "You had remains of woman after woman found on 2 highways," Boyle said. "Similar situations, similar backgrounds, all addicted to drugs." That was the unifying element. That unifying element was also, for too long, the reason the case did not receive the attention it deserved. Women struggling with addiction and sex work are among the most common targets of serial killers in America. Ardindas Gaborchurkinonaratuasanidin, historically, among the least likely to have their deaths vigorously investigated or widely mourned. The New Bedford highway killer understood that. He chose his victims knowing the world would be slow to care. But their families cared. Nancy Paiva's sister drove past the spot on Interstate 195 for years looking. The families of Cristina Montero and Marilyn Cardoza Roberts, whose remains have never been found, have lived with an open wound for nearly 4 decades. "It has always been this open wound for them," Boyle said. Detective Richard Ferreira, who worked the case from the beginning, said years later that it was the most difficult investigation of his career. "The hardest thing for me is the families. Particularly the families of the 2 girls that we never recovered the remains of. That really haunts me." The New Bedford highway killer has never been identified. The Massachusetts State Police Cold Case Unit continues to follow leads and accept tips. Maureen Boyle, who has spent more time with this case than perhaps anyone outside of law enforcement, remains convinced. "I have no doubt this case will eventually be solved," she said. 37 years, 9 women found, 2 still missing, a killer still unnamed, Deborah Medeiros, Nancy Paiva, Deborah Greenlaw DeMello, Dawn Mendez, Deborah McConnell, Sandra Botelho, Rochelle Dopiarala, Mary Rose Santos, Robin Lynn Rhodes, Cristina Montero, Marilyn Cardoza Roberts. Say their names, know their names. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends, and they deserved better from the world that looked away while they were being hunted. If you have any information about the New Bedford highway killings, contact the Massachusetts State Police Cold Case Unit or the Bristol County District Attorney's Office. The cases remain officially open. Thank you for watching True Night Crime. Share this one. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do for the forgotten is simply refuse to let them be forgotten. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. In the shadows.
Welcome to True Night Crime, where we peel back the layers of history's most disturbing unsolved cases and shine a cold light into the shadows where monsters once roamed. Tonight, we're stepping into the fog-shrouded ravines of 1930s Cleveland, Ohio, a city choking under the weight of the Great Depression, where railroad tracks slice through hobo jungles and forgotten shanty towns. Here, a killer known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, or the Cleveland Torso Killer, dismembered at least a dozen victims with chilling precision, leaving torsos, limbs, and sometimes heads scattered like discarded meat. But what if the butcher wasn't working alone? What if his gruesome signature inspired copycats who picked up the knife and kept the nightmare alive? We're diving deep into the Cleveland Torso Killer copycat theories, the lingering suspicions that multiple hands, not one, turned the flats and rail yards into a butcher's playground. Grab your flashlight. The shadows are about to get darker. Picture it. September 5th, 1934. A fisherman on the shores of Lake Erie, just east of Bratenahl, spots something bobbing in the water. It's the lower half of a woman's torso, thighs amputated neatly at the knees, an old surgical scar on the abdomen. Chemical residue, maybe lime, clings to the flesh. No head, no arms, no identification. Police call her the Lady of the Lake. She's not officially counted among the butcher's victims, but many investigators quietly mark her as Victim Zero. The precision of the cut suggests someone with anatomical knowledge, perhaps a doctor, a butcher, or a hunter. The body had been treated to slow decay, almost as if the killer wanted her found eventually. Newspapers barely notice. Cleveland has bigger problems: breadlines, Hoovervilles, men riding the rails in search of work. Fast forward to September 23, 1935. Two boys playing in a gully at the base of Jackass Hill in Kingsbury Run, a deep, trash-strewn creek bed running from East 49th Street to the Cuyahoga River, stumble on a horrifying sight. The naked body of 29-year-old Edward Andraschi lies on the slope, decapitated, emasculated, rope burns on his wrists. He's been dead 2 or 3 days. Only socks remain on his feet. His head is nowhere in sight. Andraschi was a known drifter from the Roaring Third, the city's seedy red light district. Fingerprints confirm his identity. Blood loss from the clean cervical cut killed him. Panic begins to simmer. Just 4 months later, on January 26, 1936, another discovery rocks the city. At 2315-2325 East 20th Street in the Cleveland Flats, workers find dismembered remains stuffed into half-bushel baskets wrapped in newspaper. It's Florence Flo Polillo, 44, a prostitute and mother whose head is missing. Her throat had been slit before the meticulous dismemberment. She was identified by fingerprints, too. The cuts are expert, joints separated with surgical care. The killer is escalating. By now, Cleveland's underbelly whispers of a headhunter stalking the hobos and prostitutes who called Kingsbury Run home. The summer of 1936 brings the most infamous victim yet. On June 5th, a decapitated torso is found between railroad tracks near a freight shed by the Nickel Plate Road Police Building. The head turns up 2,500 feet away along the Shaker Heights rapid transit tracks. The man, still unidentified forever, John Doe II, or the Tattooed Man, had 6 distinctive tattoos: a bird and band, Helen and Paul, a heart and anchor, a flag with WCG, a butterfly, comic character Jigs, and Cupid. His body was drained of blood, killed elsewhere, and dumped nude and unmutilated. No blood at the scene. The precision screams medical training. One theory: the killer posed the head for a macabre photo or kept it as a trophy before abandoning it. July 22, 1936, John Doe III, severely decomposed and decapitated, near a homeless camp in Brooklyn, Ohio, west side, away from Kingsbury Run. Blood at the scene suggests he died right there. Cheap clothing, large blood pool. This one feels different, sloppier. Then, Parts of John Doe 4 float in a stagnant pool near East 37th Street. Bisected torso, lower legs, kidneys, stomach, and genitals removed. A dirty felt hat and blood-soaked blue work shirt cling to the remains. Head never found. The bodies keep coming. February 1937. Upper torso of an unidentified woman, Jane Doe 3, washes up on Euclid Beach. 3 months later, her lower half appears at East 30th Street. Bisected cleanly, hesitation marks on the knife work, water, and gravel in the lungs. June 1937. Partial skeleton in a burlap bag under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. Jane Doe Sue, possibly prostitute Rose Wallace, missing for nearly a year. Decapitated, one rib gone. July 1937. Upper torso and thighs of John Doe 5 float in the Cuyahoga River, organs and head missing. April-May 1938. Jane Doe III's leg in the river, then burlap bags with her bisected torso, thighs, feet. Morphine in her system. August 16, 1938. 2 more in one day. Jane Doe IV, dismembered at a dump on East 9th Street, head and hands included. John Doe 6, decapitated at the lakefront near City Hall, knife marks on the vertebrae. That's 12 official victims, 7 men, 5 women, mostly unidentified drifters and prostitutes from the hobo jungles. Some killed on site, some transported. Some expertly dissected at the joints, others with hesitation cuts or amateur hacks. Some burned, some doused in oil, some wrapped in burlap or paper. Heads rarely recovered. The city is in full panic. Newspapers scream about the mad butcher of Kingsbury Run. Mayor Harold Burton appoints Elliot Ness, yes, the untouchable himself, as safety director. Ness forms a special torso clinic with coroners, surgeons, and detectives. They pore over every cut, every dump site. Detective Peter Merillo, obsessed, goes undercover as a hobo, riding rails, haunting rail yards. He logs thousands of miles chasing leads. In 1938, Ness makes a dramatic move. He orders the burning of the Kingsbury Run shantytown. Hundreds of shacks torched, hundreds of transients displaced. The murders stop abruptly. Or do they? A taunting letter arrives, allegedly from the killer, claiming he's moved to California and killed again. No proof. The case goes cold. Officially unsolved to this day. Suspects emerged, but none stuck. Frank DeLazal, a bricklayer with a drinking problem, confessed under brutal interrogation to killing Flo Polito. He hanged himself in custody. Likely suicide, though some whispered murder. Autopsy revealed he'd been beaten. His confession had holes. Then there was Dr. X, Francis Edward Sweeney, a brilliant but troubled surgeon and cousin of Congressman Martin Sweeney. Sweeney had anatomical expertise, access to facilities, a history of alcoholism and mental instability. In a secret 1938 interrogation by Ness himself, Sweeney failed a polygraph, ranted, and sent cryptic postcards afterward. He was committed to a veterans hospital, but never charged. No physical evidence. He died in 1964. Many, including author James Badal, still point to him as the prime suspect, linking him to a possible laboratory at a converted house near Broadway where he allegedly drugged victims. But here's where the story fractures into the copycat theories that haunt investigators even now. What if the Mad Butcher wasn't one man? What if the discrepancies in the killings point to multiple perpetrators, some mimicking the original for their own twisted reasons, others operating independently but riding the same wave of fear? Author John Stark Bellamy argued exactly that in his books. The variations in skill level, dump sites, and victim treatment suggest several killers, not one. Coroner Samuel Gerber noted some cuts were textbook surgical, others looked rushed or amateur. Some victims showed signs of being killed elsewhere and transported. Others bled out on site. One body on the west side felt out of pattern. Badal himself concedes in Hell's Wasteland that not every torso murder fits a single profile perfectly. The pressure of the manhunt, the sensational newspaper coverage, headlines screaming, "Butcher strikes again," could have inspired imitators. In the desperate underclass of the Depression, where life was cheap and bodies easy to hide along the rails, copycats might have seen an opportunity to settle scores or indulge dark urges while blaming the phantom butcher. The strongest evidence for copycats lies just across state lines in Pennsylvania. Detective Merylo was convinced the killer rode the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, hopping boxcars between Cleveland, Youngstown, and Newcastle, preying on transients. Between 1921 and 1942, at least 9 dismembered bodies turned up in swamps and rail yards near Pittsburgh and Newcastle, known locally as the Murder Swamp or Murder Marsh. Some predate the Cleveland spree by over a decade. In 1925, 2 headless male bodies were pulled from the stagnant pools and thick undergrowth of the Newcastle swamp. More followed: throats slashed, limbs hacked, heads missing. By 1934-1938, the pattern intensified alongside Cleveland's killings. Then, on July 1, 1936, just as Cleveland's panic peaked, a headless body appeared in a boxcar in Newcastle. Similar injuries. Merylo saw the rail connection as proof of one mobile killer. But the 1940 McKees Rocks discoveries near Pittsburgh pushed the copycat idea even harder. On May 3, 1940, railroad workers in the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie yards notice a stench from old boxcars scheduled for demolition. Inside the first car, a nude man cut into 7 pieces, wrapped in burlap and newspapers, head missing. Minutes later, 2 more bodies. One decapitated, charred, with the word Nazi crudely carved into his chest, the Z carved backward, almost like a taunt or a mistake by someone illiterate in the language. The victim was identified as James David Nicholson, a known homosexual and ex-con from Wisconsin. The third victim cut into 5 pieces, also burned, dead 3 to 6 months. All headless, all dumped in freight cars that had rolled through Cleveland routes. Newspapers immediately blamed the Mad Butcher. Merylo agreed. The similarities were almost identical. Yet skeptics like Badal and others argue the Pennsylvania cases show clear differences. Some early Newcastle victims had amateurish cuts, not the surgical precision of Cleveland's core spree. The timeline stretches back to 1921, before the butcher's known start, and continues into the 1940s, long after Ness burned the run and the Cleveland killings stopped. One 1940 Newcastle victim was a woman whose head was severed clumsily, unlike the butcher's clean work. Police in Pennsylvania sometimes attributed the swamp killings to organized crime or local feuds, not a single rail-riding phantom. If the original butcher was Sweeney, a Cleveland-based surgeon unlikely to mingle with hobos, how does he explain bodies 100 miles away in remote Pennsylvania marshes? The copycat theory fits neatly. Sensational coverage of the Cleveland killings spread via newspapers and rail workers. A local psychopath reads the headlines, picks up a knife, and mimics the signature dismemberment to deflect blame or thrill in the notoriety. Or multiple drifters, inspired by the same stories, begin dumping rivals along the same rail lines. The railroad itself becomes a vector for imitation, easy transport, anonymous victims, perfect cover. Even within Cleveland, some researchers point to possible copycats. Victim John Doe III on the west side, killed on site with less precision, feels like an outlier, perhaps a local trying to emulate the butcher amid the hysteria. The 1950 case of Robert Robertson, a 41-year-old alcoholic found decapitated at 2138 Davenport Avenue, bears eerie similarities but came 12 years later. Was it the original killer resurfacing, or a new admirer? Some wilder theories even float tenuous links to the 1947 Black Dahlia murder in Los Angeles, Elizabeth Short's body bisected with surgical skill, but that's speculation without evidence, born from the same one killer traveled the country idea Merylo championed. Fast forward to modern times, and the copycat shadow lingers. In 2018, the film The Kingsbury Run dramatized a contemporary serial killer deliberately basing his crimes on the 1930s butcher. Proof that even today, the legend inspires imitation. DNA Doe. Project efforts began exhuming unidentified victims in 2024, hoping genetic genealogy can finally name the dead and perhaps trace connections. But the copycat theories explain why the case never fully closed. If multiple hands wielded the knife, no single arrest could end the terror. The Great Depression created a perfect storm. Desperate transients, corrupt or overwhelmed police, rail lines linking cities in shared misery. One butcher starts the carnage. Others, reading the papers or hearing the whispers in hobo camps, pick up where he left off. Or maybe the butcher was always a collective nightmare, a label slapped on a string of unrelated but similarly brutal killings by men who saw opportunity in the chaos. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was never caught. His, or their, legacy is a city forever marked by severed flesh and unanswered questions. The copycat theories don't diminish the horror, they multiply it. Because if one man can inspire others to carve the same signature across state lines and decades, then the shadows of Kingsbury Run stretch far beyond 1938. They reach into every rail yard, every forgotten swamp, every dark corner where someone decides the butcher's work isn't finished. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time in the shadows.
Welcome to True Night Crime, where we descend into the darkest corners of real investigations and expose the twists that even the experts never saw coming. Tonight, we travel to Germany and uncover one of the most bizarre forensic failures in modern history, the Phantom of Heilbronn, also known as the Woman Without a Face. For over 15 years, police across Europe chased a single female DNA profile linked to dozens of crimes, burglaries, armed robberies, and at least 6 brutal murders. They imagined a ruthless shape-shifting serial killer who struck without pattern, evaded every camera, and left behind only her genetic signature. A $300,000 reward was offered. Thousands of hours and millions of euros were spent. But what if the Phantom was never a killer at all? What if the entire manhunt was built on a ghost created by something as ordinary as a cotton swab? We're diving into the full story of Germany's DNA mystery woman, the wild theories it spawned, and the embarrassing truth that rocked forensic science. Dim the lights. The Phantom is about to vanish right before your eyes. It begins quietly on May 23, 1993, in the small German town of Eder Oberstein, nestled in the hills of Rhineland-Palatinate. A 62-year-old woman named Lieselotte B. is found strangled to death in her home. At the scene, investigators recover trace DNA from a cigarette butt or surface. Sources vary slightly in retellings, but the profile is clear: female Eastern European ancestry. At the time, DNA profiling is still relatively new in routine police work. The sample is stored, but no match turns up in any database. The case goes cold. No one realizes this single genetic fingerprint will haunt Germany for the next 16 years. The DNA resurfaces in 2001, this time in Freiburg, linked to a break-in, then again in 2003 in another burglary. Slowly, the profile begins appearing at more scenes: car thefts, home invasions, even a heroin deal gone wrong. By 2005, investigators notice the pattern. The same unknown woman's DNA keeps showing up across unrelated crimes in different cities. She seems to work with ever-changing accomplices, sometimes Serbs, sometimes Romanians, sometimes Iraqis or Slovaks. The accomplices get arrested for some offenses, but they deny knowing any mysterious woman. Still, the DNA insists she was there. The Phantom earns her infamous nickname in 2007 after a high-profile murder in Heilbronn, Baden-Württemberg. On April 25, 2007, 2 young police officers, Michelle Kiesewetter, 22, and her partner Martin A., are on a routine lunch break in their patrol car near the Theresienwiese Fairground. A gunman approaches and opens fire at point-blank range. Michelle is shot in the head and killed instantly. Martin is critically wounded but survives after weeks in a coma. On the dashboard of the police car, investigators find the same female DNA. The Phantom has now escalated to cop killing. The media explodes. Headlines scream about a female serial killer who is bold enough to execute a police officer in broad daylight. The Woman Without a Face becomes a national obsession. Police launch one of the largest manhunts in German history. They compare the DNA to databases across Europe. They profile her as likely from Eastern Europe, perhaps with Roma or Sinti heritage, based on early interpretations. They speculate she might be a drug addict, a professional thief, or even a contract killer who changes partners to stay anonymous. Theories multiply. Is she part of a traveling criminal gang? A lone wolf who picks up random accomplices? Some investigators even float the idea of a highly organized terrorist cell, using one woman to plant misleading evidence. Eyewitness descriptions are vague or contradictory. In some cases, witnesses describe a man. No clear photo ever emerges. She seems to glide through crime scenes like smoke. The DNA keeps turning up. By 2008, it's linked to roughly 40 crime scenes across Germany, Austria, and even France. The tally includes 6 murders: the 1993 Idar Oberstein strangling, the 2001 murder of a 61-year-old man in Freiburg whose home was burgled, several other killings tied to robberies, and the Heilbronn police shooting. There are also dozens of lesser crimes: burglaries of homes and caravans, stolen cars, and petty thefts. The Phantom appears to strike anywhere, anytime, with no geographic anchor except southern and western Germany. Investigators spend an estimated 16,000 hours on the case. They set up special task forces. They issue public appeals with computer-generated sketches based on the DNA ancestry profile. But cracks start to show. The crimes have no consistent modus operandi. Some are sophisticated, others are sloppy. The Phantom supposedly works with different male accomplices every time, yet those men never mention her when caught. In the Heilbronn shooting, ballistics and other evidence point toward 2 male perpetrators. Witnesses saw men fleeing. Some officers quietly begin to question whether the DNA is a red herring. Still, the profile is treated as gospel. The hunt continues. Then, in March 2009, the shocking revelation comes. Investigators in Saarbrücken and other labs re-examine the swab batches used for DNA collection. They discover that the cotton swabs, supposedly sterile, were contaminated at the factory. The DNA belongs to a single female factory worker in Austria who packaged the swabs. She was an Eastern European immigrant doing piecework at a medical supply company. Her skin cells or saliva had transferred to the swabs during manufacturing. Because the swabs were not certified DNA-free, only sterile for medical use, her genetic material ended up on thousands of evidence collection tools used by police departments across multiple states. The Phantom of Heilbronn had never existed. She was a laboratory artifact, a ghost created by industrial contamination. The revelation humiliates law enforcement. Millions spent, thousands of hours wasted, public fear stoked for years, all because of dirty Q-tips. The factory worker herself was never a suspect in any crime. She simply touched the swabs before they were sealed and shipped. Once police switched to certified DNA-free swabs, the Phantom DNA stopped appearing at new scenes. The case didn't end there though. Real crime still needed solving. The 2007 Heilbronn police murder was later linked to a neo-Nazi terrorist group known as the National Socialist Underground, NSU. Michelle Kiesewetter killing was part of a series of racially motivated attacks by the Cell, which also murdered 9 immigrants and committed bank robberies. 2 members of the group later died by suicide, and a third was convicted. The Phantom DNA had delayed and complicated that investigation by sending detectives down a completely false trail. Many of the other Phantom-linked burglaries and robberies were solved individually once the DNA distraction was removed. Some were committed by the men who had been arrested earlier, the very accomplices police thought were protecting the mystery woman. Others were unrelated petty crimes that happened to share the same contaminated swab batch. The Phantom of Heilbronn became a cautionary tale for forensic science worldwide. It exposed how touch DNA and low copy number profiling could amplify contamination. It highlighted the need for stricter manufacturing standards for evidence collection kits. Labs began requiring DNA-free certification. Negative controls, blank samples run alongside evidence, became even more critical. The case is still taught in criminology and forensic courses as a textbook example of confirmation bias and the dangers of over-relying on a single piece of evidence. Yet the story lingers in the public imagination. Some conspiracy-minded observers still whisper that the contamination explanation was too convenient, that maybe a real killer's DNA was covered up, or that multiple women contributed similar profiles. Others point out that the factory workers' DNA matched perfectly across years and countries, raising questions about how widespread the contamination really was. A few wilder theories suggested the swabs were deliberately tainted as part of a larger cover-up, though no evidence ever supported that. In the end, the Phantom teaches us something profound about justice and science. DNA is powerful, but it is not infallible. Context matters. Human error, whether in a factory in Austria or in a police lab, can create monsters that never existed. The real victims, like Lieslott B., the Freiburg murder victim, and Officer Michelle Kiesewetter, deserve better than a phantom chase. Their killers were eventually pursued through old-fashioned police work once the ghost was exorcised. The woman without a face disappeared not because she was clever, but because she was never there. She was born in a sterile package and died the moment investigators looked at the supply chain instead of the crime scenes. In the shadows of forensic labs and police stations, mistakes can haunt us longer than any real killer. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time, in the shadows.